Ok, Livija, samo budi glasnija, pa se daleko.
Glasnije.
Malo glasnije.
Good morning, dear colleagues online and live. Thank you for coming to the second day of our international conference. This is the third conference that the Faculty of Political Science is organizing with the international participation. And the third year that Confucius Institute is, it's not the first year where we are really partners, but the first 2 years we were helping like bring professors mainly from China. And this is the first year where we are actually contributing with our knowledge and wish to sort of deepen our research activities within our Confucius Institute. So, as you know, the topic is the Balkans and the East, and today's session will be mainly dedicated to the East Asia, and we'll see some of the prominent lecturers from the region and from China. So I will first start with introducing our vice rector. We have the honor that he is today with us, Professor Dalibor Kesic, and he will say a few introductory words. And then our moderator, Anya, will take. Thank you so much.
Actually, I'm more used to standing when I speak. I would like to first convey the greetings from our graduate student, who, even though this is Saturday, has numerous other activities. So I was asked to kind of welcome you and open this conference, which is actually of extreme importance for the university, because one of the pillars in our strategy for the following 5 years is to work more on the internationalization of the university. And that is why conferences like these with international participation are seen as the actual embodiment of all the efforts that have taken place in different policies. But this is the real pudding that we can all feel when we see people coming from other countries. In this context, we are having a conference on something that is highly topical nowadays, the position of the Balkans and the East, and the subtitle Dominant Discourses, Intercultural Communication and Globalization or Anti-globalization, depending on personal views, is something that I suppose will yield a lot of different views and plenty of information that can be and certainly will be used further in future. We are particularly interested in the developments in the East. In this case, we have people also from other republics of former Yugoslavia, and it's not only them that can provide their knowledge and create kind of synergy in order to come up with conclusions that can be verified in reality, but also people coming from other regions, and other regions are considered in the papers contributing to this conference, such as the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa and East Asia, and the University of Nauka is having a very good cooperation with Asia. An example of that is a recent trip to Jerusalem, where we signed a contract of cooperation with the biggest university in Jerusalem, Hebrew University, and also we have excellent cooperation with China through our Confucius Institute, and we are highly pleased with the number of different activities that are taking place now in Fakultetu. And one of such activities is this conference, and we are highly grateful to everyone, particularly the organizers, headed by the Vice Dean Dalibor Kesic. And without any further ado, I would wish you all a very successful conference. Nice day in the world for those from other parts of the world. And I would like to declare this conference open, and I will give some of the
Thank you, Vice Rector Kesic. I would also like just shortly to welcome all our participants at this conference, especially our guests. I would just like to say a few words. My name is Anja Mutrenović. I am a Chinese language teacher at Confucius Institute, University of Banja Luka, both at Confucius Institute and Faculty of Philology. And I will be your moderator today for this second session and day 2 of the conference. After our Vice Rector Kesic is our introductory lecture from Mr. Dragan Pavlicevic from Xi'anjiao Liverpool University from China. Mr. Pavlicevic is associate professor at the Department of China Studies, and he's mostly his field of work is based on China's foreign relations with Asian countries and European countries. Without any going any further, I would like to ask Mr. Pavlicevic to unmute to open his microphone. Start.
All right.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me and see me well?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, lovely.
Your screen, if you have a presentation.
I don't have a presentation. I'll talk to my notes if that's okay.
Okay, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Pavlicevic, for joining our conference. And
can I start?
yes.
All right. Thank you very much. And of course, let me start first by thanking the University of Banja Luka for the invitation to present today. Really looking forward to more opportunities in the future to conference in person, to interact face-to-face, but under the current conditions, very happy to be able to participate in the conference today virtually. Given the developments and trends in the recent decade or so, globally speaking, as well as the most recent events in Europe, in particular this year, which are all widely understood as pitting East against the West, and also given the understanding of the Balkans is either a bridge between the two, East and West, or maybe being hopelessly split between East and West, or somehow being stuck between the two. I would say that it's very difficult to imagine a more timely and more relevant theme for discussion than the one that is put forward by this conference. So very happy to be able to present in relation to the conference's theme. So I'll approach the theme from the angle of someone who studies contemporary China and China's relations with the world, and in particular China's relations with Balkans. My original aim was to reflect on the issue of the dominant discourses in the context of the Balkan-East relations. That is more specifically Sino-Balkan relations. But thinking through this led me also to conclude that there is much space and need for Balkans to communicate, and in the most positive sense of this concept, to globalize its experience and perspectives, specifically within the mainstream international academic debates and community, which in essence is Anglophone academic environment. So I think in some ways I will also touch upon some of the other keywords and concepts of this conference's theme. So what I would like to argue today is that the dominant discourses, and very clearly manifested in the case of the Sino-Balkans relationship, predictably interpret Balkans, but also China, within the very problematic, formalistic, Orientalist sort of logic and parameters, within which a set of predetermined characteristics and meanings are extended to Balkans, to China as well, and inevitably result in a regime of interpretation of Balkan-China relations, which is in line with such Orientalist premises. In such a way, the Balkans are stripped of the potential to contribute both empirically and theoretically to the academic debates on a range of intellectual puzzles and issues of global importance, not least to one very important, and some would even argue a key question of 21st century, and that is the implications of China's growth, China's development, China's changing global role, and its relationship with the world. So I'd like to argue as well that if liberated from these confines of such formulistic interpretations rooted in Orientalist logic, authentic, context-sensitive examinations of Balkans experience might in fact make important contributions to the academic debates on a range of very important issues in social sciences today. So given the time constraints, I'll just focus on providing a very cursory overview and some illustrations. I will first note that there is a mix of Orientalist and neo-Orientalist narratives in the Western descriptions of Balkans and China. The classic Orientalist premises entail representation of Asia in a very stereotyped way, which depicts Asians, and in this case, China and Chinese, as well as Balkans, in fact, which is often treated as a, not entirely European other, which is located within Europe, but is not entirely European. Within this classical Orientalist tradition, the East and China and Chinese are depicted as irreconcilably different, twisted, inferior, often morally compromised, and hostile to Europe and the West. On the other hand, Balkanism, which has been identified by Maria Todorova as a long tradition of conceptualizing and constructing the Balkans as the other within Europe, shared the basic premises with Orientalism in its ideational construction and patterns of interpretations. According to Todorova herself, the Balkans has been very much also reduced to irreconcilably different and has often served as a repository of negative characteristics upon which a positive and self-congratulatory image of the European, when what is European, has been built. So we have classical Orientalism, we have Balkanism, and we also have Sino-Orientalism, where Daniel Vukovic in his 2011 book on China and Orientalism noted the changed patterns of Orientalist thinking in relation to China. So he argued that there is a new sinological form of Orientalist thinking, one which does not rest anymore on the irreconcilable differences with the other between the West and China, but on the principle of sameness. So according to Vukovic, China is expected to become the same as West, open, liberal, modern, free, and is measured and evaluated based on how close to those standards it comes, or to be more precisely, how short of them it falls. So this neo-Orientalist line of thinking is heavily influenced by the modernization paradigm, by the assumption of China's convergence with the political West that will follow from the integration of China into the mechanisms of global governance and global capitalist economy. So I would also argue that it doesn't take much to identify the spirit of such neo-Orientalist thinking in how the West also approached Balkans as permanently being at a doorstep of normative political and economic integration into West, which is for all practical purposes substituted with the EU, and that the Balkans are seen really as being in process of evolution toward acceptance of related values and standards, but always dramatically falling short of this. So today, I would say that we witnessed that in the case of Sino-Balkan relations, these multiple Orientalist rationalities are being articulated in complementary fashion within the dominant Western narratives. It is all these forms of Orientalism, neo-Orientalism, quasi-Orientalism, such as Balkanism, that are at play simultaneously and which complement each other in the dominant readings of the Sino-Balkan relationship or relationships. These readings are arguably dominant outside their Western perceptions of Sino-Balkan relations, but also increasingly visible and present and influential from within the Balkans itself. More concretely, in these readings of Sino-Balkan relations, we are presented with the picture of scheming Chinese keen on undermining the Western interests and ultimately the well-being of the West, launching a hostile campaign in Europe's quote-unquote backyard and southern flank, again quote-unquote, in the Balkans via a combination of sort of tools which encompass charm, offensive, diplomatic offensive, soft power offensive, investment offensive, and so on. So this is a construct which clearly fully aligns with the classical Orientalist representations of China and Chinese. In their efforts, they find keen allies in greedy, corrupt, messy, despotically ruled Balkans who would easily turn their back on the EU and the West and ultimately rationally work against their own interests for a fistful of Chinese dollars, or that is roads, rails, power plants, security cameras, and all the other usually perceived key benefits from sort of working together with China. So in my evaluation, it is this sort of Orientalist interpretation to which we can boil down reporting and analysis of China's relations with Balkans and very concrete aspects of it as well, such as loans, investments, infrastructure building, diplomacy, 16+1 framework, and more recently, the so-called vaccine diplomacy, which are the focal points of the attention and the analysis. Within the Orientalist matrix, the otherness calls for and justifies assertion of the West dominance to correct, teach, and ultimately rule the other. So such power relations are clearly established also in the dominant discourses of Sino-Balkan relations by, for example, referencing to the Balkans as the European backyard, where China is trespassing. So Balkan is seen then as something that, you know, belongs to the Europe, while China is, as it is trespassing, really using unethical, unlawful, offensive sort of action and approach to the Balkans and to Europe itself. This is how this is seen, rather than as sort of maintaining relations in forms such as economic activities, diplomatic initiatives, and so on, which would normally be regarded quite unproblematic and very normal and usual for most of the bilateral relations. So the further implications of such reading is that the Balkans and the Balkan states, either in its immaturity, naively falling a prey to ill-meaning Chinese, or being as morally problematic as them, require intervention from the West to discipline and correct them and put them back on the trajectory of becoming the same by complying with Western norms, standards, policy goals, and desired outcomes in their relationship. So to quickly summarize, Sino-Balkan relations then are reduced to Orientalist interpretations and its resultant predetermined conclusions and prescriptions for what should be done. Now, the consequence of that is that instead of potentially generating truly interesting and meaningful contribution to the academic knowledge and debate through a more open-minded and finally contextualized approach. Yet such approach would have potential to make genuine contributions to the debates in the vast array of research fields and areas, including those concerned with China's politics of Balkans, European politics, China's foreign relations, and more specific and currently hot debates about how China's power abroad is established and exercised, how China's actors and agendas interact with local context and configurations, how they fit into development plans and agenda of Balkan countries, and how Balkan countries, for example, exercise agency in pursuing their relationship with China, often instrumentalizing China for its own national interests or interests of ruling elites, which again in itself is not an Orientalist trait, but rather a very common phenomenon. Therefore, again, I would argue it is up to those who research these relations, whether in Balkans, China, or somewhere else, to break through these constraints of Orientalist framework or frameworks and to offer a grounded and authentic interpretation of the Sino-Balkan relationship, which should be rooted in careful contextualization of their sources, drivers, and modalities. Such contextualized approach might generate original insights and contributions to not just numerous research areas and fields that I've just mentioned before, but also within more than just one, in fact, several disciplines. For example, China studies, Balkan studies, international relations, international political economy, and so on. So again, I would argue that it is such an approach to studying Sino-Balkan relations, which would be appreciative of its specific context, that would also locate Balkans in the mainstream international academic debates, and of course, which are inevitably found primarily in Anglophone academic literature. So to take this further, I would also argue that Sino-Balkan relations present an opportunity, in fact, to establish Balkan and Balkan studies as an important contributor to the relevant disciplines and to the global academic debates. So just wanted to provide very quick two illustrations from my own experience in my research area, how this might potentially work. So around 10 years ago, I remember working on my PhD research and working my way through the literature on democratization and state building, which at that point were two key research areas in political science and more broadly social science, and wondering at that time how it is possible that a body of theory and arguments have been built without taking into account evidence from the Balkans, in particular the processes surrounding the dissolution of Yugoslavia and its aftermath. So this body of research, the existing body of research overall gave credence to the modernization and democratic peace theories, as well as the end of the history narrative, and argued that democratization precedes the emergence of an effective state. These conclusions would not have been supported if the simplified Orientalist tropes about the dissolution of Yugoslavia were substituted with a more contextualized research and analysis of the evidence from the Balkans, and if the experience and evidence from the Balkans informed the theory building in these research areas. Unfortunately, Balkans have little impact on the general theory building in social science, despite being highly relevant for many of the research fields that have been preoccupying attention of the social scientists in the recent decades. So not just state building and democratization, but also, for example, post-conflict studies, scholarship on market transition, varieties of capitalism, multiculturalism, globalization, and so on. All of these research occupied and continue to occupy important place in social sciences, while Balkan has been in the middle of it all and could have served and still can serve as a living laboratory to generate insights into the related issues and make valuable contributions to the academic discussions in these areas in social sciences. The premise is, of course, to escape the Orientalist interpretative frameworks and to dig into Balkan's experience with an open mind and with the full appreciation of the local context and rationalities. So that would be maybe one example. Another example would come from my first discipline, which is China studies, but which I think also shows how counterproductive exclusion of Balkans might be for the sort of body of existing body of knowledge. And it concerns the beginning of reform and opening in China. It has been long established in China studies that the key personnel, the visionary pro-reform leaders and pro-reform economists have played a key role, important role in escaping the rigid ideological constraints and introducing elements of market economy to kickstart reforms in China in the 1980s. In recent literature also, the role of the intellectual and the expert exchanges with the West is highlighted, and their key contribution to the internal deliberation and debates about the direction and content of those reforms in China is also emphasized. So it is then this alliance, or at least a combination of domestic reformers and ideational influence of foreign, and that is Western experts and institutions, that is being credited for the Chinese economic reform and takeoff, which is possibly, again, the single most important event of last 50 years, whose real significance we are only grasping today as China is establishing itself as a near superpower and as a key economic and development force globally. Again, there is maybe place for Balkans, a very important place for Balkans in these debates as well. Balkans have served as a reference point in the early reform period, and this role of importance of Balkans is under research and largely appreciated in the Anglophone literature, which is the global home of contemporary China studies as a discipline. So in specific, Yugoslav, Romanian-own reform experiences played an important role in legitimizing reform and providing specific ideas on introduction of market mechanisms, modalities of enterprise structure and management, enterprises' relationship with the state and state actors. They were providing both a negative and positive examples for China decision makers. Just as one illustration, a 200 people strong task force was appointed at the ministerial level in China and has spent years looking into the Yugoslav experience and its potential to inform China's own reform. However, this important role that Balkans have played at the beginning of China's reform and opening up remains largely unknown. So this is another example about how including Balkans into the global and mainstream sort of academic debates may benefit the global academic community, but also situate Balkan in more accurately in the global context. So just to quickly wrap up, try to bring all these issues I mentioned together. Critically dissecting the dominant narratives on the Balkans and the East may have an even greater meaning of creating possibilities to reposition Balkans into the mainstream global academic discussions and to make it an important component of and contributor to this. Thank you for your attention. Thank you again for the invitation to present today. Apologies if I have run a little bit over the time, and I, of course, wish everyone a very successful day and successful conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Pavlicevic, for this great introductory for today's second session, which is mostly based on cooperation between Balkans and East Asia, especially with China and Japan, both contemporary and historical. About the time, you are just in time, actually, for this introductory lecture. For me, most interesting thing is those relocating Balkans in global debates and also the future models of cooperation between, especially between our countries in the Balkans and China. So thank you very much for this lecture, and we even might have time for a few questions if anyone would like to ask or comment something about Professor Pavlicevic. Okay. In that case, we are actually beginning our second session with Professor Mr. Inaba from Japan. He obtained his PhD degree from University of Sarajevo, Faculty of Philosophy, History Department, and he is mostly investigating human concept in Habsburg monarchy in the second half of 19th century. The name of his lecture today is The Educational Discourse on Japan in the Habsburg, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Mr. Inaba, thank you for joining our conference. Can you hear us?
I'm glad you organized this conference and gave me the opportunity to make this presentation and upright not being there.
If it's possible to turn up the microphone a little bit because the sound is not very good. Is it possible to turn up a microphone and the sound a bit?
Yes. Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Now is okay. Thank you.
I'm glad you organized this conference with the opportunity to make this presentation. On this occasion, I present the contemporary teacher's attitude in Japan, to Japan in Bosnia and Herzegovina and the Habsburg monarchy, especially after the Russo-Japanese War, because the text which I could analyze nothing but one on the external periculars in Bosnia, and they began taking up Japan after each war. Therefore, the text represents one with historical relationships or attitudes between Balkan and the East.
Can you put the microphone a little closer to you because we cannot hear you very well.
Oh.
Just to place the microphone somewhere closer, or to speak to the microphone. Maybe you can try just to see if the sound is okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Better. Okay, please continue.
Okay. Around the Russo-Japanese War, the Habsburg monarchy cooperated with Russia through the Vienna Protocol with the Muslim issue to maintain the status quo on the Balkan. After the outbreak of its war, the Habsburg monarchy signed the Russian Neutral Authority in October 1904. Apart from the ruling elite who chose neutrality, there were various reactions which were according to nationality, religious sects, economic calculations. For example, in an article dated February 1905, when a diva sang a Japanese song at the Split Theater in Damacha, Jewish and Italian spectre played were served in Strasbourg. Around the Russo-Japanese War, the number of newly established primary schools, including Bosnia, and paired with its teachers for them increased, and this work encouraged and purged the demand collectively, such as improving the social status. In fact, on July 2nd, 1908, a two Pedrin, a legal at the Principal Congress of the Teachers Association in Travnik, that the main object of the association's establishment should be based on material rather than moral necessity. This is because even public school teachers were considered to be inferior to other bureaucrats, demanding their status as inferior to police dogs in Germany. Therefore, the teachers tried to organize the association at Sarajevo and Mostar in 1904. In June 1905, both associations organized the Legal Teachers Association in Bosnia and Herzegovina. In October of the same year, an educational journal read by the teachers, which Terska Zora, started publishing Mostar, which became the legal journal to share the knowledge around contemporary pedagogy and the educational offered in the Habsburg monarchy and globally. And the idea of economic rationality became prevalent in Bosnia, where the economic development was proliferating. In the context, teachers began to seek a balance between their task and their economic and social status. He had printed one article about mentioned educational journal Terska Zora, although there were some articles in Japan. When teacher Banuja published the article Japanese School and Folk Teachers in 1906, at the emergence, the number of newly opened primary schools was increasing in Bosnia during this period, but Banuja argued that primary schools in Japan were being established even more demoralized eras under the government's initiative. After discussing the exemption of school fees for poor families, content of the lectures, during 30 weeks of class per year and the types of primary schools illustrated that there were 54 four-year teachers schools nationwide in 1902. Diffuser explains the system in which each local municipality supports the teacher candidates on the condition that they work in the primary school and that this municipality for certain period of the graduation. At the outset of this article, Banuja were added in the beginning of quotation. In the Mikado Empire, great care is given to the education of its people today. End of quotation. Explains that the government had a key role in setting up primary schools and its local municipality or subsidized teachers' candidates. Here, he especially criticized the deficiency of support from the Habsburg authority for its agents, civilized people, namely teachers. As I have already pointed out, teachers set about organize their league since February 1906 and prepared the first General Teachers Congress, which would be held in Sarajevo on February 7, 1906. Action on July 8, for the teachers' salary was planned to be taken up as an important agenda. It was underscored at the beginning of the quotation. Today, everyone ought to be convinced that teachers are being rewarded and very full away for the hard work left to the other classes. End of quotation. Where the teachers complained that the reward was not offered to give in addition to tune with the effort in the social context, but public paid much attention to Japan, the bigger country, but nearly affirming education supported by the government and the municipalities of Japan, especially focusing on teacher training. This satisfies with the rationally given social and economic status and down for the hardships, the teachers lobbied the provincial government through the link improve their status, and that these circumstances, the information of the intimate relations between the education system and the national and the local governments of Japan would have been instructed as a comparison and a reference point for them. Unfortunately, I found no evidence in the historical documents supporting that both teachers willing drew on Japan's reference in the movement to improve their social and economic status. However, when considering a few articles about Japan within the framework of the future activities during that time, reasonably, I explained that each article was deliberately published and the materials that contribute to such activities. Naturally, there were disputes and frictions between nationality, religion, and school type among the teachers, and they did not always behave themselves only up to unified class conscience. However, instead of confining themselves to such a narrow social field in Bosnia, they proactively and initiatively endeavored by training their self-consciousness teachers and improving their life environment for going through educational systems all over the world. Therefore, I believe that Japan offered a small pace in the independent struggle of teachers develop a sense of camaraderie that's brought about the discourse. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Inaba, for this lecture about educational discourse on Japan during the Habsburg monarchy in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And it was very actually, while listening to your lecture and reading the abstract, the different types of views on different ethnical groups in Bosnia and Herzegovina, how they differently viewed the war between Russia and Japan, and especially the term that was used once, I think, the World War Zero, the war between Russia and Japan. So thank you for this lecture. And does anyone have any questions, comments? Okay, thank you, Mr. Inaba. And for our next lecture, actually first one live today, senior instructor from University of Belgrade, Faculty of Philology, Professor Jelena Gledić, Professor of Chinese language, culture, and my professor actually during my stay in Belgrade. The name of Professor Gledić today's lecture is Discourse Elements in the Representation of Sino-Serbian Friendship, Bonding Through Adversity.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Anne. I'll just share my screen. Okay. I hope people online can see it. This is the notes. Let's go to yeah. Oh, but okay. Well, either way, maybe I can just wait. I want to switch off. No, I just need to. Yes. So people online are likely now seeing the full screen presentation, right? Yeah, no.
We can see the presentation if that was the question.
It was, yeah, but we're having trouble shifting through the slides now.
All right, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not moving forward. No.
Yeah, no, nothing's happening, sorry. Okay. Let's try this. Oh, geez. Okay, yes, should be okay now. Huh. Okay. Well,
Technical help is coming.
I think I managed, yes. And I think you can remember in Belgrade that I used to troubleshoot quite a lot and told you that's
yes.
right. So thank you to the organizers for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be part of this conference. And hopefully my presentation will fit in well with what has already been presented. And I'll try to sort of pinpoint some elements that I think are most useful in an overall context, although my research is focused concretely on Chinese and Serbia and the Sino-Serbian friendship. So my presentation today builds on my previous work. So I'm doing a sort of wider research on the role of culture and Sino-Serbian relations, and I'm looking more specifically at the change.
Sorry, we don't hear you. So your kind of voice fades in and out.
It could be because
might be the mic or.
It could be. Yeah, I'll try and speak louder. Is this better? Is it better now?
Yep, now we can hear you clearly.
Yeah, I'm shouting at the laptop, so hopefully.
Yeah, sorry for that.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Okay, well, in any case, so my presentation today builds on a wider research on narratives about Sino-Serbian relations, and then specifically the role of culture there in a theoretical sense. And I'm looking at changes that happened before the start of the Belt and Road Initiative and then after the start of the Belt and Road Initiative. It builds on several previous presentations, publications, and data sets. In terms of theory, what I'm using is a theoretical framework. It is Ruth Smith's theory on cultural diversity, which actually posits the existence of diversity regimes, which Ruth Smith conceives as something that exists objectively. So his idea is that this is a concept that sort of objectively exists in all societies. And to simplify it, the notion is that any kinds of differences between people and entities are defined in some way. And then different political and social actors can choose or not to choose to intervene in those. And in my research, what I'm finding and what is quite interesting is that it seems that some significant global actors, especially some significant global actors for the Balkans, such as, for example, the EU and China, have a very different approach to these, where the EU, for example, has a very sort of hands-off approach and says that people should self-determine and it does not want to interfere in these, whereas China, on the other hand, has this sort of more active top-down approach of governing these differences, and they go from ethnic, cultural, etc., and they play a very important role in bilateral relations. Now here, I use a lot this very complicated term of culture, there, of course, I use a sort of very basic definition in the theoretical sense, but then in terms of analyzing my materials, I use a usage-based approach. So in my materials, what is perceived as culture in the material, that is culture. I don't necessarily look for an alignment in the definition of culture between the people who use them. So for example, if we speak about cultural cooperation, if they think this is a cultural cooperation, even though it might seem very political, I say, okay, this is a cultural cooperation. And then finally, an important thing here is order, although I won't get too much into that today. And order, because it sort of comes up here, is a sort of configuration of political authority that sustains some collectively agreed goals. So that's sort of the theoretical standpoint that I'm coming from. Then in terms of the methods being used, I have a constructivist mixed method approach. It's mostly qualitative research with some descriptive statistics. And I use cross-cultural comparisons in this wider research using materials from both China and Serbia. And I provide this diachronic perspective, which I mentioned already, looking at before the beginning of the Belt and Road Initiative, and then the materials that I'm using are official documents, and here I mean speeches and press releases and statements of official bodies, ministries, etc. I look at a lot of media reports. So I look at both samples from specific time points of all articles in specific papers in Serbia and China about Sino-Serbian relations and perceptions of one country and the other. I also look at viewers' comments in Serbia and then forums in China. And I also look at samples of reports on specific important events in the relations of the two countries. I also do some semi-structured interviews with participants of Belt and Road Initiative projects. And as I said, I use results of a more global public opinion survey that was done in 13 European countries. And I use results from previous research done mostly in Serbia for comparison as a sort of benchmark to see where my data comes in. And so what I'm presenting today is part of this sort of wider ongoing research. And I'm going to emphasize a couple of things that I think are an important background to sort of put into place when discussing the discursive elements in narratives on Sino-Serbian cooperation. I know that some of this was discussed yesterday as well and from different angles, but this part of the world that we happen to be in now and that most of us live in has been called already sort of Europe's troubled region. And Dragan mentioned this morning as well, this sort of Europe, but not really Europe and not sort of close enough. And then this notion, of course, of the Balkans or the Western Balkans, this tricky loaded term that a lot has been written about already, is sort of seen as a crossroads between the East and the West. But I think it's important here to note that we're not the only place. So a lot of the Eastern European countries and those that were part of the 17+1, now 14+1, also see themselves as the crossroads. And that came up a lot when the Belt and Road Initiative route to Europe was sort of being planned out. An important thing is the socialist past of this region, which is used in the narratives of a sort of shared path between China and Serbia, although political scientists know very well that Yugoslav socialism and Chinese socialism are quite different animals, so to speak. An important element here is also the fact that Serbia, the case I'm looking at, has very clearly defined so-called 4 pillars of foreign policy. So Serbia aligns itself against the US, Russia, and then China and the EU. So in that sense, it makes a very good case where you can compare the EU and China, because that's all often contentious whether you can really compare the EU and China as entities. Here you can, because they are 2 of these 4 pillars. An important part of this background is the fact that the political system in Serbia is a so-called stabilocracy, which is a sort of stability in a regional and European sense, but an autocratic regime from within, which is significant because of the influence on the media and the sort of connection between the official narratives and the media reports. And then, of course, the fact that although this has shifted quite a lot since the beginning of my research a couple of years ago, that Serbia was sort of seen as the place with the largest share of planned investments in the Belt and Road Initiative in the Central and Eastern European region. And in that sense, it was seen as a sort of the biggest partner for China. And of course, not to forget is the fact also that these countries in the region that we're talking about have quite a few differences in terms of the cultural legacy, and this also has been discussed quite a lot these days. Another important thing to emphasize here before we just take out the discursive elements is that there are some contrasting dichotomies when we talk about Sino-Serbian relations, and our keynote introductory lecture speaker here has this great article which talks about the sort of fear versus opportunity that exists not only in Serbia, but also in Central and Eastern European countries. And concretely in Serbia, and this was discussed not in the context of China, but there was an interesting presentation yesterday about migrants and how people from countries that were war-torn should or do they not have, or should they not have compassion to migrants. Interestingly, and since my thesis and my presentation today is this bonding through adversity, there is this kind of compassion that is seen, especially with the Chinese migrants that came in the 1990s to Yugoslavia from Hungary when Hungary changed its migration policies. And I won't get into this history too much, but if there are questions, I'll be happy to answer them. So there is this compassion, of course, but then as China sort of rose economically, there is this fear as well. There is the fear, the common fear with migration and economy that, you know, they will take our jobs, but then also this fear that is also happening now is the fear that because Serbia is not in the European Union, that certain ecological standards will not be respected and that the Chinese investments might sort of affect in a very significant way the environment in Serbia. Then also there's this contrast that I find that there is an absence of narratives about cooperation. And even in the sort of early days of the Belt and Road Initiative in 2012, 2013, especially before the significant change of government in Serbia, when you had visits of prime ministers to China for the first BRI contacts, people in the media commenters say, like, why are they talking to China? What's happening? And then all of a sudden you have, you know, this full engagement and Xi Jinping's visit. And in a couple of years, you have this very sort of big shift. So that's something that's very interesting to look at. Of course, as I mentioned, this opportunity versus threat, and Dragan has written quite well on that. And then this sort of question of a shared past, because you have the historical realities, but then all of a sudden we're these old friends, we're good friends, we have this shared political history, but then you look at history books and you see that actually Tito and Mao Zedong were rivals for sort of global leaders within their respective political systems. And this dichotomy is illustrated through these two images. So the one on the right is the cover of a magazine from 1995. And the title says, "The Chinese are coming," in an almost menacing way, which is when a lot of these migrants from Hungary migrated down to Belgrade, south to Belgrade. But then sometime, 20, 25 years later, on the left, you have this image of actually the celebration of the October 1st in Belgrade a couple of years ago, which was made into a celebration of the relationship between the two countries and not just China. So quite a big shift. And this sort of change in discourse is something that I want to emphasize, which is very important, because it's not sufficient to just look at the discursive elements in the moment, but rather the shift, because what I'm going to present is something that I see is also shifting now. So these discourses and cultural ties, they definitely changed, and I'm finding that in my data with this increased economic cooperation, both in tone and volume. So they appeared. And I'm finding very interesting data that information about China and Serbian media before this increase in cooperation was almost completely taken from Western media. So for example, with the Olympics in 2008, you had topics that you would never find now, questions of human rights in Tibet and other topics that are now written with much more nuance. They were basically copied at that time from Western media, almost word for word, and now there are sort of very nuanced discussions about these issues, and even sort of criticism of EU hypocrisy in terms of the refugee crisis, etc. But also in tone as well. And it's also interesting, and I won't get into that too much today, but it's interesting to point out this sort of difference in approach that also exists. So both parties seem to have these shifts in tone and volume, so both on the Chinese side and on the Serbian side. But then in the Serbian narrative, you have more of a sort of essentialism and exceptionalism, and emphasis of Serbia being China's best partner, maybe only partner, leading partner especially in the now 14+1 initiative. While in the Chinese narratives, you have more sort of a pragmatic view where it sort of notes the size of the Serbian economy, and it's true that in the Balkans it is the biggest economy, and it's important in terms of the roots that it's building, etc. So this is also something to keep in mind. And then finally, I mentioned before, but here a good illustration from this public opinion survey that I mentioned. You have this sort of perceived period of the best relations between Serbia and China that doesn't really match much the reality. And what I find especially striking here is the oldest age group. So these are the ages of the respondents. So the oldest age group actually puts sort of the recent years under President Vučić. It's quite true that these are sort of some of the best relations. But then they also, as a second, put Yugoslavia until the breakup, where there were many periods in which actually China and Yugoslavia didn't have such good relations. And in the 1990s, actually, China was one of the only foreign countries that Yugoslavia had good relations with, and no one sort of mentions that. And this is important sort of as a background for this bonding through adversity, because on the one hand, you ignore the fact that you were at that time politically aligned, but then you do feel a sort of but there is a sort of compassion with the people. And again, I come back to yesterday's presentation on migration, that is something interesting to look at. Now to the discursive elements. I can't imagine a presentation of this without mentioning the famous Walter Defends Sarajevo film, which was a sort of mainstay in any kind of activity and presentation about Chinese and Serbian bonds that started happening in the 2010s. For those of you who don't know, Walter Defends Sarajevo was a famous Yugoslav film that was played quite a lot in China, especially after the Sino-Soviet split, after Soviet films were no longer welcomed in China. So this film and then The Bridge, starring the same Yugoslav actor, Bata Živojinović. So these were very, very common in China, and a lot of older Chinese know Yugoslavia and Serbia through this. And this is something I experienced probably as well. When you study in China, they start, singing the songs and mentioning that. And actually which is the image on the top right. So this actor was also politically active. So he was part of the Serbian Socialist Party, and he was also part of some of these initiatives of bonding with the local Chinese community, and very much used there. And it's not an accident that this is also a war film. The Yugoslav war film. And then other things that are there significant, and I mentioned these in my abstract as well. On the bottom left, it's the famous Blok 70. So anyone who researches the Chinese in Serbia knows this Blok 70, which is sort of Serbian Chinatown, but not really, because it's just the commerce center, which is also now sort of being relocated. Near there's more of a Chinatown where you actually have more of them living in shops and casinos, etc. But this is sort of the famous place where they gather, and where most Serbians during the 1990s and the economic sanctions, where most Serbians actually got things that they couldn't buy in shops, either because there weren't any things to buy or because they were too expensive. And then finally, the images on the bottom middle and right. So the bottom middle is the scene of the bombed Chinese embassy in Serbia, in Belgrade, which was bombed in 1999, and when 3 Chinese citizens lost their lives. And on the bottom right is the Chinese Cultural Center, which is now in this location, built but still not open. And interestingly, a sort of office space for Chinese companies doing construction projects in China, and a hotel and a restaurant, and the Confucius statue right in front of it. So all these sort of pieces of history are those that appear most prominently in any kinds of talks about Sino-Serbian relations. And those that I sort of take out, but that are also the most dominant ones in the period that now we're talking about 2010, 2020. So sort of until the beginning and just before the COVID pandemic. So there is this idea of socialism, and it appears in both aspects. So one, and it's very vaguely sort of mentioned, especially in the speeches as well, because there is this sort of idea of this shared experience that people went through, but then without really noting is it as positive or negative. Because in Serbia as well, now sort of the transition country socialism isn't necessarily seen as most positive, in China also perhaps. There is a change in the type of socialism that existed in the time when Yugoslavia existed. So that's one sort of element. Another is this sort of economic crisis of poverty. And this is something that's maybe more connected with the Chinese migrants in China itself, but then also with China, pre-1990s China. So there is this idea that both peoples are, that they both went through extreme poverty and crisis. There is the NATO bombing, and this even very specifically mentioned as a blood bond, which appeared in a certain period of time quite often, that the two peoples have a blood bond because of the loss of Chinese lives in Serbian territory. Then also interestingly, in the context of this conference, especially global periphery. So both are seen as part of the global periphery. They're not the West, so they're sort of not main actors on the global scene. And that's a sort of also point of connection. Interestingly, the idea of the rise of the underdog may be funny for such a massive country as China, but since in a different research. I remember this quote that I read in a Chinese history book from the beginning of the 20th century when they talked about China as a sort of thing in the past that doesn't exist anymore, kind of rose. So perhaps the Serbia hopes that they can maybe do the same kind of switch in a way. And then this idea of a sort of long-term stability in the face of crisis, which is just seeing the present moment as one point in a sort of longer period, which of course gives hope in a way. And all these elements are used as depicting the bond between the two countries and the two peoples. Now, what is important for us to sort of keep in mind is, as I mentioned in the wider research, what I find quite clearly is that this sort of tie that is talked about is linked to economic and political interests and not necessarily historical realities and sociocultural factors. And this narrative is thus subject to shifts, so it changes. And changes can be seen now. So these discursive elements that I mentioned, when I look a bit sort of further, and especially towards the end of this period that I'm looking at, like 2020, and then with the COVID pandemic as well, it seems to be changing to remove some of the elements that seem to be more tied with negative experiences. So for example, this most sort of extreme blood bond, which when it's said at a sort of very happy occasion, whenever it's trying to promote cooperation and someone comes out and say we have a blood bond, it seems that it was noted maybe this is not the most effective thing. So this almost disappeared out of the discourse. And you can also see it in the way that, for example, China's COVID aid is being depicted, because the Chinese did help quite a lot. There was a delegation of doctors that were Serbia as well, but then this isn't emphasized too much either, perhaps because of the tie with pandemic and disease, etc. So these emergent changes should be definitely monitored. And it will be interesting because I'm also finding that certain elements, some of these discursive elements, they appear first in the Chinese official documents in the media, and then they appear in Serbia. So it seems to be some kind of link there. How formalized it is, or whether it's just taking, for example, this iron friendship that supposedly exists, it appears first in Chinese media. Very interestingly, not just for Serbia, but no one mentions that. Pakistan is the iron brother. But it would be interesting to see what will happen, especially after the upcoming Congress, which everyone is waiting for, to see whether and which changes will come into place. So it will be interesting to follow that. And that's it for me. I'm sorry if I took too much time, but hopefully it was interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gledic, for this lecture. It's always a pleasure actually to hear the methodology and the theory framework of your lectures and how you put it. And also one of the actually most interesting topics was that kind of shift between no cooperation between Serbia and China, and Serbia as the leading partner of cooperation with China since the Belt and Road Initiative actually started. And also the thing that is not mentioned enough is that cooperation between China and Yugoslavia during the 1990s. Where actually from Belgrade, one of the rare direct flights was to Beijing, and even we remember that very well. So yes, we were together a lot of times on that flight. So that was actually one of the topics that caught my attention. Thank you for this lecture, and if anyone has any questions.
Thank you very much. It's really interesting and all those elements, and I was wondering if the question of Kosovo and maybe even the connection with Taiwan was another discursive element.
Yes. It sort of. I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't have that image here now. But it was one of my. So in this public opinion survey, it was one of the questions, and it was quite high in the important elements of Sino-Serbia. Like, why is China important for Serbia? The second top answer. The first one was economic cooperation. The second one was support for Kosovo. But it seems that this didn't even come up. Maybe it's such a touchy topic that it doesn't come in too much into the mainstream. So it appears there when you talk about it, but you don't really have it said at these sort of opening ceremonies, perhaps because it's such a touchy issue. Yeah, and unfortunately because, and maybe some of my personal opinions will come in now, because I think Serbia is not sufficiently trying to learn from China how to deal with this, because there seems to be some kind of confusion in Serbia's attitude towards Kosovo. And I think that that's a sort of one space where more deliberate cooperation with China could be useful actually for the country in a political sense, how to handle the whole thing, but it's not there. So it appears as an important element, but not narratives.
Interesting also how it relates to this region. For example, totally opposite, where Republic of Srpska expects support of China in everything. So when they mention separation from Bosnia and Herzegovina, this is a very touchy issue for China. But not a lot of local politicians understand that this is actually the area where China totally disagrees. And it's a very sensitive issue for China in that sense.
I think for Serbia maybe as well. And maybe it's because like we in Serbia are also sometimes confused. I mean, here I see myself as the general public, because it might be the same. I mean, it might be that there is some kind of normalization of relations that is happening. And I'm sure China wouldn't be too happy about that either. Yeah, so it's very, very interesting, very touchy, and a big question on how to deal with that.
I had that this thesis like that actually China is supporting the whole PIH, and I remember the comments on that, very especially this fact. Well, China has its internal reasons why they support the whole of Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's nothing personal.
Yeah.
China does not think emotionally. It's a state. States do not have feelings. They have interests only. So it's interesting.
And going back to what I noted, the sort of pragmatism that also appears, you compare official documents and, in Serbia, it's this, we're the best, we're the brightest. And then China is like, this is useful and good. And so, yeah, and nothing, I mean, yeah. It's an important thing to keep in mind. I won't put labels of, good and bad, as you say. I mean, there shouldn't be any morals to it and no feelings to it. You should just note that this is the way it is and then align your foreign politics.
Definitely the shift, as you said, happened since the history relations and the war movies to this political and economic interest that both countries, let's say, share. But definitely these problems are much, much bigger and will not be solved in any time soon, especially in the field of political interest.
I was asking to comment on the issue of size, because we're sort of talking about your research setup methodologically. I have no problem with that. It conveys the idea that there are two partners here, and then we have one side of the screen and one side of the screen, and their media and our media, and so on and so on. I mean, let's face it, Serbia is like a provincial city in China. So, in terms of economic and populational volume, so do you think this is avoided in all this rhetoric or discourse as well, or is it actually there in the stream of comment?
It's a very interesting question. So in terms of the methodology, this is well done in terms of looking things in the context. So of course you look at, and not in absolute numbers, but in relative numbers. So that's also in the qualitative analysis. But it's interesting also when you look at the EU and China and then the way China approaches Serbia, because on one hand, yes, size-wise, number of people-wise, and it has very real constraints in terms of potentials for economic cooperation, of course. And it's a realistic fear that people might have, but Serbia is a country and it has a vote where votes are had. So in that sense, China very much respects that and does see them as an important equal player. It also plays in a very interesting way the fact that Serbia is a European country. It's not an EU country, but it's a European country, even though in the EU, they often conflate Europe and the EU. Serbia is a European country. So you can find, for example, a Chinese article that, Xi Jinping met with European leaders. And there's a question of him and there's a picture of him and the president of Serbia. And if you said in Brussels, is Vučić a European leader? Well, technically, yes. But would you consider him one? That's a question. So it's useful also to have good relations. So there's not in this sort of pragmatic sense, I think China very much recognized that, yeah, okay, there's the number of people, but this is a state. It is recognized. It is in all the bodies where we need them, also because of the Taiwan issue. And so in that sense, size doesn't really play an important role in that specific context.
Yeah. So would it be correct to say, okay, so pragmatism, utilitarianism lies obviously as you learn. So then Pakistan, with its 100 million inhabitants, or Nigeria, are obviously much better opportunities from the Chinese perspective, right? So would it be correct then to think of Serbia as a kind of foothold in Europe, rather than an economically hub? It's a mini market. Right? It's a Ghana.
In a way, yes, that part of the sort of activism in my research is trying to sort of put out there as much as I can without going into politics, which I do not want to do, is the fact that it's replaceable in that sense. I mean, in the economics, I'll be very open about it. That's why I mentioned other countries in Central and Eastern Europe that are also crossroads between the East and West. So Serbia, in that economic sense and the sort of strategical sense, it is in a way replaceable. But where I must admit personally, and here I will put good and bad, think, you know, China's approach is better if we talk about global peace as a sort of ultimate goal of everyone, is because it doesn't neglect countries just because of the fact. If you look at the way, you know, the EU or the US look at a lot of these countries that you mentioned, you know, they just don't, you know, if you don't have, they're just not there and we're hands off and we don't care. What China is trying to do is have relations with all of these countries in the political sense, irrespective of their importance in the economic and strategic sense. So it's a perhaps a better approach, in my personal opinion.
May I just, it's not an accident, but it's very interesting because Bosnia-Herzegovina, when it was after the separation from Yugoslavia and everything, so when the first ambassadors were sent out to China, China was so far away, we did not have any relations with China before, and the local politicians were very sort of afraid of going to China and how they're going to deal with China and what we're going to do in China. Actually, Anya's grandfather was one of the first ambassadors. He was the first ambassador to China from Bosnia-Herzegovina. And when he was going to China, his friends gathered, they advised him, so when you get there, you just should find a local community and stick to them. You should not go up on the level, but just stick to this local community. They're much bigger than we are, and try to make business on that level. And in that sense, actually, there were some recommendations further on when we have sort of some annual meetings of people who are dealing with China and the age. And there were some recommendations from the University of Sarajevo representative who said actually we should stick to smaller communities and smaller provinces or cities in China and make business with them and try to cooperate with them, because everything on a bigger scale is too much for Bosnia-Herzegovina, and especially these different issues and political issues, and it should like stay on the level of economy and culture.
I think this differentiation is something that is something we could learn a lot from China. And if you look at I saw that I peeked at your presentation, I said I'll talk a bit about history, which is great. I mean, you know, of course there are positives and negatives, but like all negatives aside, if you look at Chinese history, it has quite a long history of cooperating with different sizes of entities to more or less success. But still, I mean, there is this good differentiation, which just because a country is small enough, it doesn't mean you should neglect it completely. You can completely cooperate with it on a political level, social and cultural level, but say, yeah, you're too small. And it seems that there is maybe avoidance of this and this kind of hands-off and all are equal. So it's, yeah, very interesting. Good point.
Yeah, that's why the first cooperation actually started with cities and on city and provincial level universities. Okay, thank you, Professor Gledic.
Thank you very much, everyone, for the comments.
Now we are actually back for online lectures. Just a second. For our next lecture, we have. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think you can just, I removed it. So she can just start.
I think she also, Ying said she will not turn on the camera. So
yeah.
The internet was not.
Okay. Professor Ying Tsai from Tianjin University for Technology and Education from Tianjin, actually our partner university, which established the first Confucius Institute here in the Republic of Srpska, University of Banja Luka. And the name of today's topic is Confucius Institute as a platform for promoting intercultural communication, a case study of the Confucius Institute at the University of Banja Luka. Professor Ying, you may start. Your microphone is turned on. Thank you for joining our conference.
Thank you, Anya. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, thank you. Good morning, honored professors. I'm awfully sorry to say that I cannot turn my camera on, for if I turn it on, I'll be offline right away, though I don't know why. Anyway, I'm so honored to have an opportunity to deliver a presentation entitled Confucius Institute, a platform promoting intercultural communication, a case study of the Confucius Institute at the University of Banja Luka. Okay, now I would like to share my screen. Yes, here, and then this. Okay, can you see it?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you, great. So I will play it here. Yeah. Okay, fine. My presentation falls into the following 5 parts. That's introduction, BIH and China, Chinese language teaching institutions in BIH, Confucius Institute at the University of Banja Luka, and then we come to conclusion. Okay, as to the first part, I would like to say, with the implementation of the Belt and Road Initiative and the China Central and Eastern European countries cooperation mechanism, the practical cooperation between China and Central Eastern European countries in many fields was deepened. Language barriers and cultural misunderstandings will hinder the further deepening of international exchanges and cooperation. Therefore, it is of significance to strengthen political and trade ties and to enhance mutual understanding of each other's culture and history as well. The richer the humanistic exchanges are, the deeper the friendship will be, the deeper the cooperation will be, the stronger the relationship ties between countries will be. This presentation is aimed at providing insight into the work done by the Confucius Institute at the University of Banja Luka, the achievements made, thus sharing its experience and lessons in promoting intercultural exchanges. On April 3rd, 1995, Bosnia and Herzegovina and China established diplomatic relations at the ambassadorial level, and up to now, it has been 27 years. Since the establishment of diplomatic relations, the two countries have been committed to promoting bilateral relations and cooperation. As reported by the Embassy of the People's Republic of China in Bosnia and Herzegovina, since the launch of the Belt and Road Initiative and the 16+1 cooperation mechanism in 2012 and 2013 respectively, China and BIH have achieved remarkable results in practical cooperation in various fields. BIH successively organized serious events, including 16+1 Production Capacity Cooperation Forum, High-Level Conference on Tourism Cooperation, Innovation Cooperation Conference, and 16+1 Meeting for Transport Ministers, etc., and has established the 16+1 Veterinary Science Center. According to the statistics of the Ministry of Commerce of China, in 2020, the bilateral trade volume between China and BIH was $193 million, and China's direct investment flow to BIH was $8.58 million. In 2020, Chinese companies signed 9 new contracts worthy of $355 million with BIH. It is reported by the Embassy of the People's Republic of China in Bosnia and Herzegovina that on May 19, 2022, a promotion meeting between the Chamber of Commerce of Chinese-funded enterprises in BIH and the government of the Republic of Srpska was held. Prime Minister of Republic of Srpska expressed his willingness to strengthen cooperation with the Chinese enterprises and hoped that Chinese enterprises would actively participate in the infrastructure construction and green energy projects of the Republic of Srpska. According to Xinhua News Agency, Chinese ambassador to BIH, Ji Ping, said in an interview with BIH State Television in 2020 that during COVID-19 pandemic, China-BIH ties grew closer. Ji said the top leaders of the two countries had exchanged many letters to express their common desire to work together to fight against the pandemic, adding that the two governments also signed the Memorandum of Understanding on cooperation in the field of health and medical science to strengthen the medical science cooperation of the two countries. At present, there are 7 Chinese-funded enterprises in BIH, including Huawei, Shandong High-Speed Company Limited, China Sinopharm International Cooperation, and so on. For those Chinese companies, there is a need for local employees who are able to communicate in Chinese, both at the construction site and at the office, to help translating, filing documents and bills in local languages, and communicating with local government departments and institutions related. Moreover, those local employees can also help the Chinese side have a better understanding of the local laws, regulations, and customs of BIH, thus achieving efficient communication between the two parties. Tourism is one of the most important industries in BIH. With the visa exemption agreement between BIH and China coming into effect on 29 May 2018, number of Chinese tourists to BIH increased dramatically. In the first 8 months of year 2019, around 64,000 Chinese tourists visited BIH. What the above mentioned indicates that BIH needs more local Chinese-speaking talents to help with the projects jointly carried out by two countries. Okay, now let's move on to Chinese language teaching institutions in BIH. In order to create a platform for people in BIH to learn Chinese language and a platform for people in both China and BIH to understand each other better, Chinese language teaching institutions were established in BIH. In September 2011, the first Department of Sinology in BIH, the Department of Sinology at the University of East Sarajevo, was set up, which started to offer master's degree in 2016 and doctor's degree in 2018. Thereafter, the Confucius Institute at the University of Sarajevo, the first Confucius Institute in BIH, was established in April 2015. And the Confucius Institute at the University of Banja Luka, the second one in BIH, was inaugurated in January 2018. Besides, the optional Chinese language course at the University of Mostar was started in March 2018. Though there are controversies surrounding the Confucius Institutes around, their function as a platform for promoting intercultural communication cannot be denied. By teaching Chinese language, Confucius Institutes introduce Chinese culture in order to help other countries understand China better. Meanwhile, Confucius Institutes, by facilitating exchanges and cooperation between China and the rest of the world, also serve as a platform for China to understand other countries, thus realizing a two-way cultural transferring. Since the Confucius Institute at the University of Banja Luka is very active, it is chosen as a case study what can be done to promote intercultural communication by closely looking at what it has done, the achievements made. Okay, now the Confucius Institute at the University of Banja Luka. The official opening ceremony of the Confucius Institute at the University of Banja Luka was held on 21st January 2018. President of the Republic of Srpska, Milorad Dodik, the deputy mayor of Tianjin, Zhao Haishan, unveiled the Confucius Institute at the University of Banja Luka. More than 300 local guests attended the ceremony. The opening of the Confucius Institute is a proof of friendship and successful cooperation between Republic of Srpska and China, said Dodik, which showed great support from the local government to the cooperation with China, as stated in the news reported by the Confucius Institute at the University of Banja Luka. Okay, this is a picture. The rector was presented the plate of this Confucius Institute. Okay, now in September 2018, the Confucius Institute at the University of Banja Luka was approved to set up a HSK test center. Up to date, more than 100 candidates attended HSK tests from level 1 to level 4. The HSK, which is 汉语水平考试, is an international standardized test to assess the Chinese proficiency of non-native Chinese speakers. This exam is used to measure how well test takers can use the Chinese language in their daily, academic, and professional lives. The test results are most commonly used as a proof of Chinese language proficiency when applying for works or scholarships to study in China. So it means a lot to Chinese language learners. Okay, this is a picture for candidates taking HSK tests in the University of Banja Luka. Here. Courses offered. Since the start of its operation, the Confucius Institute at the University of Banja Luka has been offering Chinese language and culture courses. For example, Chinese language courses, martial arts, Tai Chi, calligraphy, Chinese painting, etc., and organizing students to take HSK tests. The learners of the courses offered by the Confucius Institute include kids in kindergartens, elementary school pupils, high school students, university students, veterans at nursing homes, learners at schools for students with special needs, government officials of Republic of Srpska, and other social groups. In a word, the Confucius Institute welcomes everyone who wishes to learn Chinese language and culture. In year 2018, accumulatively, 27 groups were organized to attend Chinese language courses and culture courses. And in year 2019, it was 21 groups. From January 2020 to June 2021, around 1,600 teaching projects were fulfilled. Now, there are altogether 243 learners at the Confucius Institute, including 52 high school students, 112 primary school pupils, 25 kindergarten kids, and 54 learners from other groups. Those are all the pictures of the learners of Chinese language courses and culture courses. This is Chinese painting. Okay, as to activities and events organized. Since its establishment, the Confucius Institute has organized about 170 cultural events academic lectures and other activities with the participation of government officials, university professors and students, media representatives, representatives from Chinese companies and others to promote intercultural communication between the peoples of China and BIH. Lectures organized covers various topics about China, including China in the eyes of foreigners. This is the picture of the event. And
Professor Tsai, can you hear us?
yes, I can hear you now. I'm sorry, I'm offline. Though I tried my best to stay online, but okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. And if it's is it possible to start the presentation?
Yes, I can go on with that. Okay, these are all the pictures. These are all the pictures of these Confucius Day events. Okay, I will do it a little bit quick. Then let's, other services provided. Besides what mentioned above, to help the implementation of the international exchanges between China and BIH, there are other services provided by the Confucius Institute, such as translation, arrangement of visiting schedule, building content network, and so on. In other words, the Confucius Institute participates in networking and connecting various education and non-education stakeholders from both sides. With the help of the Confucius Institute, around 20 visits to BIH or China were successfully realized. In September 2018, with the help of the Confucius Institute team, the Department of Culture, Tourism, and Social Policy in Republic Srpska was invited by the Tianjin Tour to attend the China Tourism Industry Expo held in November 2018. And this is the picture when they were in China. Okay, now let's move on to recognition gained. With the great support from officials of the government departments, education and non-education institutions, and the public in both countries, the courses were offered, events and activities were organized, and other services were provided by the Confucius Institute, which gained recognition from the peoples in BIH and China. On 16 July 2018, Rector Liu Xin of the University of Technology and Education in Tianjin was awarded the St. Stephen's Award from the President of Republic Srpska, Milorad Dodik, as an expression of gratitude for her outstanding contribution in the establishment of the Confucius Institute. And this is the picture of that. In September 2018, when the delegation led by the mayor of Banja Luka visited Tianjin to attend Summer Davos and the 18th Roundtable Conference of China Tianjin's international sister cities, IGER showed their appreciation to the efforts and achievements made by the Confucius Institute. Ambassador of the People's Republic of China to Bosnia and Herzegovina, Ji Ping, spoke highly of the works done by the Confucius Institute on public occasions. Okay, the last part is about challenges and problems faced. I would like to talk two main points. First one is that there is a shortage of Chinese language teaching professors. Now there are altogether 5 professors teaching Chinese at the Confucius Institute 2 Chinese professors and 3 local professors, with 2 working full-time and 1 part-time. Since the Confucius Institute is now offering Chinese language courses to 243 learners of 14 groups, each professor is lecturing around 6 to 12 hours per week, with more primary and secondary schools proposing to take Chinese language courses. More professors are needed. Due to the pandemic, the number of Chinese professors willing to work abroad is decreased. Meanwhile, local professors for Chinese language teaching are hard to find for various reasons, say salary, stability, etc. Second, with the deepened cooperation between BIH and China in technology, infrastructure, education, agriculture, and so on, more projects with Chinese companies involved are carried out. Therefore, more local working staff members who can speak Chinese are needed, and people in BIH would like to learn Chinese language. But learners of Chinese language drop out for various reasons. So, suggestions put forward to solve the problems mentioned. Also, 2 suggestions. First of all, there is a need to cultivate more local Chinese language professors by establishing departments of sinology in more higher education institutions in BIH, and providing the learners with the scholarships to study in China and internship in schools, Chinese companies, and other institutions related with the use of Chinese language for the improvement of their Chinese language proficiency. The official languages of BIH are Serbian, Bosnian, and Croatian. Most young kids and many adults do not speak English, while the foreign language of Chinese professors is English. Compared with the Chinese professors, local professors have an advantage in facilitating Chinese language teaching by making use of local languages. In addition, Chinese professors generally stay in BIH for only 1 to 2 years, and then leave when their working contracts are fulfilled, which makes them seem less stable. Therefore, it is important to cultivate more local professors for Chinese language teaching by establishing departments of sinology. Another suggestion is to make efforts to make Chinese language learning more interesting and attractive. Currently, there are about 777,000 young people between the age of 15 and 30 in BIH, and more than 60 of them are unemployed. With the Chinese language learners increasing, more local professors for Chinese language teaching will be needed. At the same time, the Chinese language learners can enhance their competitiveness in other jobs related with the Chinese language application, say translators, tourism guiders, employees at Chinese companies, and so on. In a sense, more people learning Chinese language may also contribute to relieve the unemployment situation of the young people in BIH. So we can say, by offering Chinese language and culture courses, organizing cultural activities and events, holding lectures covering a wide range of topics, and helping in networking and connecting education and non-education institutions in both countries. The Confucius Institute at the University of Banja Luka illustrates that Confucius Institutes can be helpful in promoting the bilateral cooperation between China and other countries in various fields besides Chinese language teaching and intercultural communication, thus achieving a win-win situation. Okay, that's all for my presentation. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I'm awfully sorry for this interruption. Wish you a great day and a successful conference.
Thank you very much, Professor. Actually, Professor Ying Tsai was the first Chinese director of the Confucius Institute at the University of Banja Luka. So She was also a part of many projects developed by the Confucius Institute, lectures, classes, and Chinese language courses, and it was a pleasure to hear her views on development of the CIs. And we can say that her lecture served as some kind of introductory for our final lecture for this session, because she mentioned a lot of Chinese enterprises and companies in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Our final lecturers for this first session today are Dr. Ljiljana Stević and Dr. Dalibor Savić. Ljiljana Stević is a director of the Confucius Institute at University of Banja Luka and professor at Sinology Department at Faculty of Philology, and Dr. Dalibor Savić is an acting dean of the Faculty of Political Science. The name of the lecture is Chinese Business Culture in Bosnia and Herzegovina Between Hybrid Tradition and Local Settings.
Thank you, Anya, for this presentation. So I will do the presentations on behalf of Dalibor and myself. So this research is just being developed. So I will mention the structure of the research and how we envisaged, but the actual part of the empirical part we haven't started, but just we are still in the design phase. So we use cultural dimension of business, specifically traditional Chinese culture in business and structural model of culture as a framework, and with the intention to examine in which way this model impacts business operation of Chinese state companies in the age. So cultural perspective represents a dominant paradigm in managing in organizations, and we will use mainly Edward Hall theory as well as Hofstad, describing Chinese culture in terms of Confucian, which influences Confucian influences, which provides important keys to understanding. However, this approach does not allow us systematic comparison across multiple cultures. So this is why we use this alternative comparative approach, where cultures are compared across common set of dimensions. Two well-known framework for this analysis is Edward Hall, as I said, at Hofstad, which together help to explain features of Chinese business behavior that foreigners often find puzzling. So the first, I will talk about brief Chinese history and introduce what followed after the reform in 1978. Why I'm doing that is just to give the perception of China here in Bosnia, the lack of some general knowledge about China, and just to explain why it's important to understand these culture differences and models. So after that, I will talk about specific Confucian culture and make comparative analysis, as I said, using the Hofstad and Hall theories. This all will lead to an introduction and announcement of the empirical research, which has the aim to draw conclusions based on the set of theories and offer recommendations, which we hope maybe will be used also about decision makers and some enterprises in Bosnia in dealing with Chinese state companies. It was a good introduction by Jelena also about Chinese enterprises. Dragan was talking about this Yugoslav model that China used in 1978 for the opening up, and I was sort of and also Ying mentioned these Chinese companies in Bosnia and Herzegovina, so I will try to add on it with this sort of touch. What I wanted to make some just few points that China is an ancient country whose wealth and achievements outshine contemporary Western societies for millennia. However, an appreciation of the sheer scale of that phenomenon is less known. So they usually identify themselves as the sons of Yellow Emperor, Huangdi. So why Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor, is relevant today because the contemporary Chinese perceive themselves as the direct inheritors of the ancient set of traditions and practices that retain their value. Of course, the narrative of homogeneous Chinese identity does not rest easily with the fact that the country has more than 50 recognized ethnic minorities, and the important ruling dynasties as Mongol Yuan and Manchu Qing were initially foreign invaders. However, the minorities also considered themselves Chinese first, and the foreign rulers were absorbed into Han culture. So Mongols and Manchus wielded sovereignty, but their script never replaced Chinese characters. So I will just go briefly through some achievements through the dynasties, being saying that like the Qing, during the Qing Chinese technology far surpassed the West. Tang era was considered as a golden Chinese golden era, golden age, where we had maps and building standards introduced. The first start of the clock was made, porcelain was invented, and one quite peculiar thing is that the upper class used scented toilet paper. So during the Tang also we had this poetry and magnificent colored pottery. Song dynasty was usually the most mentioned invention of the gunpowder, compass, national banknotes, mobile type printing, etc. And I will skip the whole long period, which is also important for Chinese history, and we'll go directly to this opening up reform, which is very important for where we are today. In 1978, started with Deng Xiaoping, where China demonstrated to the international community for the first time that it perceives itself as the space of interconnectedness, as opposed to the space for conducting the world revolution or evoking Sino-centric world order. China started to pursue the strategies of making new partnerships all around the globe as a solid platform for speeding up the Chinese integration into the world community. And then we go back to this Belt and Road and China 16+1. Why it's important for us is because this is where the cooperation with Bosnia-Herzegovina and other countries of the Central and Eastern European actually starts. Before that, the cooperation was merely on paper. But with the 16+1, now 14+1, China changed its attitude, and the number of the projects in BIH started to increase. And we saw also the presentation the team made, the number of when the Confucius Institute started to open, the Sinology Department in East Sarajevo, etc. So this was the part of this, as I mentioned. It was not only 16+1 at that time. You know, there were many other international institutions, organizations, frameworks of cooperation that China initiated, like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is now quite, just recently had a meeting and a lot of people are talking about it, especially what is happening in the current situation and China's role in Central Asia. By pursuing these strategies of multilateralism, which also draws back to the Chinese tradition of cooperation in the history and some various Chinese models. So China wanted to increase its legitimacy on both international and domestic level, and in doing so, it's acquiring a larger international audience to present them with the Chinese story and secure the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party within China and indirectly on global level as well. So today, China is the biggest trading country, second largest world economy, with business practices different in many aspects compared to those offered by West. In making its global network of partnerships, China started to deepen its relations with Central and Eastern European countries, and they faced various challenges in cooperation with China. And these challenges, apart from many administrative and business life, are also linked to the Chinese culture. So for foreigners, engaging with Chinese people involves experiencing cultural differences that need to be understood. And we plan to outline this, how Chinese culture differs from others and how it affects its behavior. So culture, in this sense, we define as the way we do things around here, or the collective programming of mind, distinguishing the members of one group of category of people from another, according to the Hofstede. Or cultures that can be approached in several ways, the most direct being the narrative, where each is described in its own idiosyncratic terms, according to Fisher. So for China, the key narrative descriptor is Confucian. And it's important to understand the features of this Confucian thought. I will not go again into the details what are the most important features of the Confucian thought. By Confucianism, we also don't mean in this sense about the religion, because it's not concerned with God and God's relationship with the man or man duties to God. No, it is concerned with an afterlife. It's mainly focused on life on earth, with improving governance of country through the system of morals and behavior, which would extend from a king downwards throughout the society. By king also, we go in the current period between authorities and society. So there are several concepts of Confucianism, like again, usually the one that is most important and used throughout from the family now to business relations and companies. Also what is important is that the rule of law is morally inferior to the rule by virtue, which is unimaginable in European context. And the second consequence is the emphasis is placed usually on social obligations rather than on individual rights, which is also sort of a foreign concept. Describing, as I mentioned, that we will use the theory of Edward Hall, who drew a distinction between societies of high context and low context cultures, which countries occupying continue for a very high to very low, with many placed in intermediate range. But what we are mainly interested in is that the most important difference between high and low context culture lies in the nature of communication. The low context culture, like Anglo, Netherlands, Germany being examples, I would put that in our culture as well. The explicit content of the message, the words spoken, the wording of contract, the definition of standards is the message. What you say is what you mean, and it does not matter who you are or the context in which you say or write it. In high context culture, like China, Japan, Korea, as an example, explicit words spoken or written are less important. Meaning is carried by the social and power position of the speaker or listener. Non-verbal cues are more important than the actual words being spoken, and the speaker and the listener share a common understanding that allows them to understand that which is not what is not being said. So in the context of communication with China, if you're invited to the meeting, it's very important where you're going to sit or where you're going to put your guests. And a lot is said, actually you can understand what is your position and how they perceive you by the place where you sit. Also, we have some other examples. There are also differences where you sit at the meeting, where you sit at the lunch, or where you sit during the tea, if you're invited for the tea. And also the gifts that you're given, how you open your gifts, when you open gifts, the cards that you receive, business cards. There are so many other things that are also clues that we need to know more than maybe some actual wording. It's also, if the Chinese partners are smiling a lot, that doesn't mean that they're happy. They can be nervous, and they show it by that. And usually other counterparts would think if they said something funny, or they will just increase this awkwardness of the situation, or they will feel like the other side is laughing at them. And we had this situation actually at the real meetings where they felt really offended by this laugh. So this is why it's this is a very good way of this low and high context theory, a very good way of explaining the differences and understanding. This distinction between high and low, in this case, China, maybe in BIH context, explains some important business misunderstandings in low context culture, contract also, which we find here also that was an issue. Once the sign, people think the situation is over, but however, in the high context culture like China, the contracts are good faith statements of intent, subject to change if necessary. And even this change for China is a part of the process. They think it's Chinese business people are used to change. They expect the terms of deal to change, and this can be offended if attempts to do so are interrupted as a bad faith or breach of contract. So similar issues arise in respect of standards. This phenomenon is not solely attributable to high-low context difference, but also to the less developed, maybe Chinese legal system and the confusion and emphasis on harmony. Nevertheless, if low-context businessmen understand the nature of high-context communication, they will be better equipped to understand what is happening to develop appropriate response. We used several theories, several theses of Hofstede, like mainly on high-power distance, which is consistent with Confucianism. Dalibor reminded me several times that I need to emphasize this, that sometimes there is a confusion, like also the hierarchy and respect of the management team, which is on very high level in China, which may be not be the case in our country, and also how this can reflect the relations within our companies when Chinese actually employing local people, how do they behave within the companies. And also many times mentioned also the second dimension that Hofstede identified, which is contrasting individualism with collectivism. I will not go into, we planned also to mention some other, like a Khmer culture map, but I will not have time for this. What I just wanted to mention at the end is that this is how we envisaged our theoretical framework of paper with this introduction, short introduction presenting the Chinese position in the world, in the past and right now. And then the plan was to continue with the qualitative research based on the open questions and interviews, semi-structured, and we will define this culture, misconceptions and concepts doing business in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but taking into consideration local administrative obstacles as well, and organization of governmental bodies. By this I mean that there are a lot of things and misunderstandings when it comes to our own local administrative division. There are a lot of things happening, for example, when we have big Chinese state-funded companies starting to initiate new projects on the state level, then they expect also the state level approval, which is usually not given them, but may be offered by the entity level. And there is a lot of projects on stall because the Chinese government is just waiting this approval from the state level. There are a lot of confusion about that. So with this, I would finish this presentation. I hope that
Definitely.
and I hope Dalibor is happy. If you want to add something with that, please. Work in progress. I emphasize that at the beginning.
Thank you, Dr. Stage, for this very concise and precise lecture about Chinese business culture, which I find very important since a couple of our Chinese language learners from Confucius Institute actually are working for some Chinese companies as translators or administrative workers. And also with the establishment of Sinology department, it is very important to learn about Chinese business culture, the type of hybrid tradition, the hybrid culture between a lot of different models. And also to implement the local settings in that is always a challenge. So thank you for this lecture. And if anyone has any questions for...
I have a comment, since this is going to be done. Part still, I think it's useful to add something. So I often hear comments in Serbia, and there's already this perception being formed that the Chinese companies coming to Serbia are not really prepared and they don't know anything. But then on the other hand, on the Chinese side, I hear that they get all this training before they come. So it would be interesting to include this kind of, when someone tells you something about Serbia, and the Chinese say, oh, I didn't know that, almost out of politeness. That's my sort of intuitive response to that. So maybe it would be good to include this and see whether that is in fact the case. Yes. So how this kind of, I didn't know that was a matter of politeness, but then local people get this idea that these people are totally dilettantes. So I think it would be interesting to gauge whether that's in fact the case.
From our side, definitely anti-fairness is the case, especially when you look at some reviews of media reports from the meetings with the Chinese clients, the body language touching usually. In Asia, you don't do bodies. Touching and hugging, even hugging, especially in case there is a female president or prime minister or minister, you have very high heels, so towering over your partner is considered very rude, actually. So it also shows that we did not prepare ourselves or we do not care how the other side is going to perceive us.
They did know that. Okay, any other questions?
Right, because I don't know the presentation of today's conference, so I talk about some of the views about my come here. Because my spoken English is not fluent, if you don't understand, please I will translate, okay? Because because I want to talk about education, higher education, about China and other countries. Only my field thinking. First, I want to talk about the background of the China higher education in the Balkan countries. Balkan countries have most of the countries in this island, in this island, because they have a long history and prosperous culture. When I'm a boy, I watched a movie of Balkan countries. For example, like the bridge and the Sarajevo. When I watch this movie, I can sing some songs. We can translate the Chinese language. In the street, both the children and the young man can sing these songs. So this movie can give me a inspire. So I don't think in one day I come here and I visit this culture. This is a local habit. So in most of the Chinese population, they can in Balkan countries the culture and the population and the history give the Chinese people a good imagination. So I think this culture and history can maybe a type of two country, maybe the East and the Europe a type. So I think this is we have a cooperation based maybe this based on cooperation. This is one. Another, China has a long history, a 5,000 history. In 2021 BC, China has established a united country. That is Qing Dynasty. In the Song Dynasty, China has established trade and commerce with Europe. That is the ancient China, the silk, land silk and sea silk with Europe. So I think today we created a Silk Road. That is the established base of all the silk. That is all the silk. That is the fundamental of old China, ancient China, and the Europe. So today we found a Silk Road sensitive. That is the road of two areas, East and Europe. Now I want to talk about today. How can we have a cooperation between China and Europe? We know, you know, China is a developing country. In 2030, China initiated a Silk and Road, and we want to make economic and trade cooperation with the developing country, third country. That is a cooperation. One side, two side cooperation. And I think it will promote China and the European countries' development. That is one. Another, in these years, China has become has become a quick development road. We established the 40 years plan. We want to establish a good cooperation with all over the country. I think that is promote all the countries' development. And next, in the 20-30 years, China's higher education will enter high level in the world. So our aim, our obligation is establish high level stronger country all over the world. So in base this obligation, we need to build more cooperation in higher education. For example, in humanity, economic, management, science, engineering, and medicine. In this area, we can have a different priority. For example, in Europe, in the Middle Europe, in the West Europe, in the Eastern Europe, this is countries. In here, most of the countries have their humanity in deep study. So we need to have the communication. Then in this year's China's economy developed very quickly. We have ourselves characters of the economic development. So I think China's economy field pattern needed to the Europe country to communicate. So I think in the future 50 years, China is broadening or opening in our higher education. We welcome also for the foreign students to study in China University. That is one side we can communicate, another side we can promote it together. Next, Chinese Confucian Institute is a door opening to side of the university. That is promoted exchange language and culture. And then we can border our communication of all of the field. I think higher education is a good chance for two sides, for Eastern China and Western Europe. Okay, that's all. That is all my speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Luo, for these insights between the cooperation between our countries in China. Professor Luo is a new Chinese director of the Confucius Institute at University of Banja Luka, and has experience in working in China, Ethiopia. So his experience will definitely help us in the next period of working at CI. Thank you very much. If this is all, I would like to close this today's first session, and to thank all the participants and who made their lectures both here and online, and to ask the present participants to join us for lunch and a short break. Thank you very much.
And we continue.
We continue at
1:30.
Yes, 1:30.
Thank you.
We'll see you there.
Microphone. Yes. Okay.
Okay, welcome back. We are continuing with the second part of today's conference. As previous part, our sessions are being recorded, just a small note. So the first one I'm going to announce, it's my honor, Małgorzata Bogusz. Good pronunciation. Bogusz. Szybko. So she comes from Wrocław University, and I'm sorry, but I'm not sure about the rest. So you can introduce yourself more properly, but the theme is Turkey's influence on the culture and identity of Bosniaks, which is a very interesting topic for us here. We'll see. I'm also interested, we can discuss it more about Turkey's soft power and these very popular films and the sort of new culture. And also the activities, I'm not sure about the activities of the culture center, Turkish Culture Center in education. And also they're very active in Serbia also. But
okay, so we will discuss about it because I am new in this maybe topic, so it's really good that I will hear your experience.
Yes. Thank you so much. You can have a seat.
So hello once again. My name is Małgorzata Bogusz. I know that this is really hard, but it's our Polish version of Margaret. And it's really funny for me when I hear this new version of my name. At the first, maybe I will say about our Polish tradition, maybe something like Polish tradition. In Poland, when we want to sound intelligent, we are saying that according to some American researchers, or we are saying that some old Chinese proverbs says that something. So I will start that according to the Americans results researcher, the most demanding presentation is after the lunch break. So this will be a challenge for me, and I see that the weather is not helpful. And I drink so strong coffee. I hope that I will not have the heart attack, but we will survive this, yes. So today I will share with you part of my research. I am a PhD candidate in the University of Wrocław, and my research is about the entities as a quasi-state, so about the foreign policy too, in the Federation and in the Republic of Srpska. But today I will focus on this Federation, especially in, of course, in Bosniaks, so this Muslims, people from Bosnia, and how it's Turkey influenced to create a Bosniaks nationality. So of course, at the first, really quickly, I will talk about the soft power because it's really common and well known, but this will be a good introduction for my presentation. So the soft power it's not something new because this was present from the AIDS, and this is based on something like friendship, because we were not using aggression, which was really common in the Cold War. Where we had arms race and the space race. And this was not, let's say, economics. So when the falls up the Iron Curtain, diplomacy and the politics focus on this soft power. So they are building foreign policy based on the friendship. So the most important factors was a culture of the state. So this should be, of course, attractive. It's good if it's similar, but maybe based on this religions issues. The second thing is the political values, including the foreign policy. And the same or similar allies, the membership in this same international organization, have this same or similar direction of this foreign policy. Action in this international organization, so active membership in this organization. And what is changed in the last few months, guided by the general accepted norms in their law and governance. I mean, it's changed, and this is good for discussion maybe, because we see that some organizations, some countries, some governments use this soft power to some direction, but another direction they are using hard power, what is not accepted by the international norms. So following this soft power, modern Turkish foreign policy creates something what is called neo-Ottomanism, what is connected with the ideology of Ottomanism, which was connected with the Ottoman Empire, of course. The Ottomanism was in the mid of 19th century, and it's based on the reform to reform Ottoman Empire to the more pro-Western country where every citizen will be equal, and that's all, and that's all. So the neo-Ottomanism was created in this modern foreign policy to come back to this Ottoman Empire tradition. And it's based on this, of course, soft power. At the first, it's this feeling that Turkey is a heritage of the Ottoman Empire. So they are feel like responsible to the territory which belongs to Ottoman Empire, like, of course, the Balkan, so Albania, region of Kosovo, and, of course, Bosnia and Herzegovina. The second factor was Turkey's geographic location, and it's one of the best locations we can say in the world, because it's a crossroad between West and East, between Christian culture and the Islamic culture. In the past, there was a Silk Road. Now we have a Bosphorus Straits, so this is so economically good for Turkeys. And thanks to them, they are called as an Anatolian tiger. Of course, now it's changed because we know that Turkeys have some crisis, but he still have enough money to help and to develop another countries. And what else? This is active in global policy. Of course, Turkey's membership of NATO, but maybe what is now the most visible is that they are active in this, Russian-Ukraine conflict. They are like a moderator in a negotiation between Ukraine and Russia. So now we can see that Turkey feel enough good, enough powerful to be active in another region in the Balkans. So they started help maybe not now. It's not a good word, but they felt and feel enough powerful to help another region, for example, Balkan, and of course for Bosnia. I know that this is maybe good subject for a good topic to discussion about Bosniak's nationality, because we can ask when it started, what is a nationality, but I will focus on the period after the 1995, after the Dayton Agreement, because this is the first time when Bosniak has his own state. Of course, it's a question, it's his own state, because they have to share it with Serbian, with Croatian. So it's a question, but let's say about the first Bosniak's own state, Bosnia and Herzegovina, after the Dayton Agreement. So, of course, after the war, this was a big challenge to find a good solution to building Bosniak's nationality, because This was the first time where they where they create his own government, own strategic sector like education, like medical care, and that's all. But Bosniak's politician doesn't think about this cultural goals, so about this separating the Bosniak's culture, indicating specific and independence. This was the main goal and the main challenge for them. So they choose the cheapest tool to create this, the politics of memory. This is really popular in the Balkans, that some governments started creating policy on some wrongs from the past. And in this Bosniak's nationality, this was, of course, Srebrenica as a symbol of breakup of Yugoslavia after the war. The second, of course, siege of Sarajevo, and the fighting in Mostar. They get help from the Turkish, and they started found his roofs. So the roofs was, of course, an Ottoman Empire, and this is what was connected Turkish and the Bosniaks. And of course, this was a problem because after the war, a lot of the Ottoman souvenirs, like buildings, monuments, and that's all, from Ottoman Empire was destroyed. Thanks. Okay, was destroyed. So luckily, Turkey has enough money to help them, and this was maybe the most important things to building this Bosniaks feeling of nationality. And thanks from the Turkish aid organization, they rebuilt a lot of monuments. Of course, one of the most famous, the most important was TIKA. This is a Turkish organization of cooperation and something. I have in article a few examples of this, but what is important and what have to be lined up, it's that they helped not only to rebuild Muslims buildings, but they helped, for example, to renovate Samostan in Vojnica and the Sabor in Sarajevo, Orthodox Sabor in Sarajevo. So they don't focus only on the monument, on the Muslim buildings, but they prove that Muslims and the Islam can help everyone. The second popular organization is Institute of Yunus Amra, and the most famous project is Moj Izbor je Turski, and they help to learn Bosniak students Turkish language. So they organize students exchange. They helped organize some students packets for school. The next organization is Turkish military contingent in UFOR, and this is help more maybe, let's say, humanitarian, similarly like this Red Cross and what is the same like our Red Cross. We have a lot of this organization, and I hope, I am sure maybe that people who are living in Bosnia saw a lot of this logos in Bosnian buildings or in, I don't know, in Bosnian's website, that something was sponsored by this Turkish organization. And maybe just quickly to conclude and to show this, let's say maybe some strategy or some tools. The first of them is nurturing a politics of memory. We can see how Turkey, presence of Turkish ambassadors or politics on the every anniversary of organized by the Bosniaks. What else? In Bosnian television, we saw a Turkish production of the film of Alija Izetbegovic. And Alija Izetbegovic is often present in the speech of President of Turkey. So we can see that really supported Turkey's support in the Bosniak's politics of memory. The second thing is the widespread presence of Islamic symbol, especially on this buildings which was renovated by some Turkish aid organization. The next things, it's a common heritage of the Ottoman Empire. So this is what is connected Bosniaks and the Turkish. Representatives of European Islam. And this is really important because after the attack of on the World Trade Center, the Islam has not good PR. So the Turkey and the Bosniaks as the Islam state in the Europe started to create something like a European Islam, not so aggressive Islam. And the Islam presentation, Islam as a religion, open it and helps everyone. So I said it about this, that this Turkish organization helped to not only to Muslims people, but they help to, for example, to this rebuilding of Samostans or Orthodox or Catholic Church. And this is all from my side. I hope that this will be just an introduction to some discussion, because I am really interested for people who are here, who are living here, and what it's your observes of this, let's say, some phenomenon of soft power or influence of Turkeys in Bosniaks, maybe not Serbs, but Bosniaks especially.
Thank you, Malgorzata. This is definitely a very sensitive topic.
Oh, okay.
I like at the beginning, that you define the soft power and maybe just, more like a theoretical, just introduce maybe nice elements of soft power and make distinction between the public diplomacy and soft power, like a framework. And then if this public diplomacy has sort of field or it's attractive enough, then it's soft power. If it's not, then, we don't have receiving side. But what I noticed that Turkey, as a now modern big country, it's being more and more attractive, especially after COVID or during the COVID, because this was one of the rare countries that was open to everyone, where even though it was a difficult situation, but many people really just thought about the holidays. And I noticed, especially here and in Serbia, that people saw Turkey with different eyes, as the very kind people, hospitable, very good conditions, and there is also impact, as you said, mentioned of TIKA, which is very active not only in Bosnia but also in Republic of Srpska and Serbia, working on the remains of the Turkish old buildings mainly. And also now maybe that's the part of the past already, but there was a certain period when the sort of soap operas from Turkey were quite popular amongst the common people. And they were very smart in introducing not the old Turkey, but the modern Turkey.
Okay.
And that face of Turkey that people saw, I think, helped also sort of, especially among the Serbs, that Turkey is not someone, just from the past invading, changing the religion and destroying, but there's still, of course, that narrative and discourse present. And then there is an issue definitely about the identity, ethnicity, religion, when it comes to the Bosniak side, but, and in federation. So maybe you want to join in and comment on that and give your own perspective, how it's perceived. It's like one of those, when they say malignant impacts on Bosnia they usually mention China, Turkey, and Russia. Those are three countries that are not seen by the European Union as a favorable impact on Bosnia, especially when it comes to maybe avoiding the rules, corruption, and some other things. But definitely we have the people here siding with Russia and the Federation more with the Turkey. But it shouldn't be like that, actually. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. And this idea of neo-Ottomanism, I also know a lot of people who see it a bit critical because it kind of excludes, as you said, other factors of Turkish hard and soft power, or like hard power not in the sense of military, but in the sense of business. For example, with Serbia, I think Turkey and Serbia in the region are still the biggest trading partners. Only far, the Bosnian exchange is much lower. So I was wondering if you are contrasting this, maybe like soft power and more hard power in the sense of business. Where also, I was just had an inspiration when you showed the slide with the organizations from Turkey that are present. If I think of Germany, for example, who would of course not be seen, I guess, by most people as like a bad external power, you would probably find even more symbols that would fit. You have the Goethe Institute, they are also present in U4. There are also other institutions, and so I think it's important to find this nuance of like what is maybe a broader international approach, because, for example, Yunus Emre is present in so many countries, and what is really kind of the specifics to Bosnia that is connected to the Ottoman times. And parts of this. But yeah, it's a very interesting research.
Okay, thank you.
Want to make some more additional comments, anyone?
No? Oh, okay.
I can say something starting from that as well. I think it is very important, I think, to see that Turkey is much more concretely when it comes to money, Serbia, which has to do with side again. There is more there to be, there are more interests to be realized, where there is a bigger market and a bigger territory. And one other thing, I think I would suggest that in the future you don't refer to a Bosniak state, because there is no Bosniak state, not in practice, not in theory, not in rhetoric.
Okay.
There are definitely close political ties between the current ruling party in Turkey and the biggest party in the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which are very personal. So this idea that Bosniaks love Turkey, I think you will find if you travel through the Federation.
So Bosniaks,
okay. That SDA loves Turkey, or that SDA loves everyone. That I think is probably correct. But again, going back to size, just like we heard yesterday, some people declaring their love for Russia. The question is how important 1 million people subscribe for Russia. In the same way, I would ask how important are 1 and a bit billion people in Bosnia for Turkey, which has 80 million.
Yes.
So the matter of size, I think we have to take into account for all these questions. I come from a very small country myself.
And it's also this matter of feeling and interest, and we still go back that states do not have emotions and feelings, only interests. And people as well, to be true. You know, if you ask people here if they would send their children to study in Russia or Turkey, I think they would choose Germany or Austria or UK, or, you know, so it's a matter of interest which prevails, always some kind of emotions, you know, it's not that. And also, as I mentioned, people here do not refuse to go for holiday to Turkey because they feel that Turkey is sort of being biased towards the Bosniaks in federation or something like that. And they're more than happy to travel. And even now there's this kind of medical tourism, which is very taking its big part, you know, people getting treatments in Turkey, which also affects none of these people. Unfortunately, I mean, they're in usually the most difficult situations, but they do not refuse treatment because it's happening in Turkey or something.
This organization, pomozi.ba, okay, I have it on Facebook. Yes. And there is really often that someone is traveling to help with medical care to Turkey.
Yes, it's widespread here as well. And then there is an issue also about the education system. If you remember, until recently, the Erdogan actually put a stop. There was a very popular school in Sarajevo, a Turkish school named after, yes, I forgot, I couldn't remember the name, but I know there was a big issue with that, actually, that Sarajevo. It's a system of schools, actually, supported by the person who was exiled from the Turkey, and it's like considered as one of the biggest enemies of Erdogan. So, and then we go to our next presentation. I don't know if you can call Borislav, because it's the online one. Well, I cannot see even if our colleagues are. Next presentation is by, I presume, Professor Engelbert from Budapest Business School, University of Applied Science in Hungary, together with Judith Saki and Blaž Fajt. The name of the presentation is The Geography of European Football Championships, a Balkans Perspective. I must say that I was a big fan of your paper, like China-Africa relations during the pandemic, and I know you also sort of writing about the East Asia. And another thing which is quite, as my friend would say, you shouldn't add this private thing, but I was honored to be at the conference at the Budapest Business School in March. And note to myself, it takes more than 2 people to organize a conference now. So, Professor Engelbert,
thank you very much. Our title of our presentation is The Geography of European Football Championships, a Balkans Perspective. Thank you for the invitation to the conference, and I greet from Hungary you, from a little town, Széchenyi. It is a little town at the border of Slovakia. I am very sorry that we can't be present at the conference in person, but unfortunately my colleague has become infected with COVID. And that's why I have to give this presentation alone. It is a challenge for me because my English is not very strong, but I hope this presentation will be interesting and understandable for you. First of all, I would like to say a few words about the background of the topic of this topic. This presentation is part of a larger research project on the topic of the geography of European football championships. And now I would like to present the Balkan aspects of this topic. In this presentation, I introduce the changing role of the Southern European countries in the continent's football life from basic geographical perspective. It is important that it is from a geographical perspective. Sports geography is relatively a new field in the field of social geography, relatively young, about 100 years old, maybe. This research is justified by the fact that the sports is also an economic activity in most countries and globally too. Our aims, or my aims, are to analyze the achievements and participation of the countries in the European Championships. I would like to present territorial and special differences. And I am looking for reasons and consequences of the constant change in the European football map, in the European football life. And a few words about the research methods and research questions. It is a very important question for us. What are the regional differences in European football? We investigated only men's football on the continent, the statistics of European football championships, and we examined the period from 1960 to 2021. In this period, there were 16 tournaments in Europe, and we divided this period into two parts, before the change of regime and after the change of regime in Europe. With the help of this, we can compare the two periods. For example, which period was more successful for the Balkan states or for other states and regions in Europe. The other important question, how has the role of the Southeastern Europe in football, in European football changed? There are on the slide some aspects of the question are as follows. Which countries were host countries of the championships during the period investigated? What characterized the country's participation? What characterized the performance of the national teams during the period under review? And it is very important, as we wanted to investigate football player migration in Europe. Which country are donor countries or host countries? The interpretative framework the central periphery approach by Wallerstein. A hypothesis often appears that Balkans or other region is a football region in a semi-peripheral position on the continent's football map. But we want to test these hypotheses, true or not true. We want to confirm or investigate the hypothesis. Basis for database analysis is, as I said, statistics of the European football championships. We used only public databases, but we encountered some difficulties during the research. For example, terminological issues. How can the term foreign player be defined? There is no official definition in the European football life, but there is definition in the literature. A foreign player is a player who is a member of national team, but is employed by a sports club in another country. So he is an employee. And another important definition in the literature for a national team player. Who is a national team player? To determine this, we have used FIFA regulation. And the next slide presents a table introducing the European football regions. For the research, we created these regions that can help us illustrate the changes in the European football life and the regional differences. I know that this categorization is debatable, but it can help us to illustrate the processes and the results of our research. Categorization based on several factors of geography, such as cultural geography and the important role of the countries in the European football life. In the case of Balkan football region, the most important factor was geography. In this case, the categorization was made difficult by the large economic and social differences between the countries of the region. And there are some other terms what are very important for us. Western and Eastern Bloc, I know it is a well-known definition. And but another very important term for the evaluation is the top league countries in Europe. This category includes the 4 countries with the most successful and strongest football leagues ranking by UEFA. These are Germany, England, Italy, and Spain. On the slide, you can see these football regions. The important question was how successful national teams from Southeastern Europe were in the history of the European Football Championships. Most time, the West and Latin European teams won the gold medals, a total of 12 times. In the history of championships, only one national team from the region, from Balkan, won a gold medal. It was Greece in 2004. It happened 5 times, I can say only 5 times, during the history of the tournaments that a team from Southeastern Europe reached semi-finals. 3 times Yugoslavia and Greece and Turkey once. Yugoslavia won silver medal twice. The slide shows the years in red color. But it is very interesting that there are some nations, Cyprus, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, which didn't participate in the European Football Championships. We investigated the participation rate of the countries of the football regions. The participation rate is the proportion of the countries of the football region in relation to the total number of participating countries. This investigation shows that the participation rate of the Southeastern Europe countries increased after the change of regime, after 90s. The numbers you can see on the table on the slide. But there are a few important points here for evaluation, the correct evaluation. Firstly, the number of states in Balkan region doubled after the 90s. And secondly, after the change of regime, the number of participating teams has increased continuously in the European Championships. On the next slide, you can see a table that shows the results of national teams. The teams are ranked by points goal difference and by goal scored. And the Southeastern European countries are in the second half of the list. The list includes 35 teams. A total of 35 national teams participated in the European football championships in the last 6 decades. And 9 countries were from Southeastern Europe. We investigated the geography aspect of the organizations of the European championships. Most often, the tournaments were held in Western or Latin Europe and not in other European football regions. In 1976, the championship was held in Yugoslavia. I think we think that the country's neutrality played a major role in this. And in 2021, hosted 11 European cities, the matches. For example, Romania from Balkan in Bucharest. On the next slide, you can see that the number of participating teams has continuously increased. And the number of foreign players has also steadily increased. The turning point was, it is important, what is important, the turning point was the regime change in this process, and the so-called Bosman ruling in 1995. At the last tournament in 2021, the percentage of foreign players already reached 64% in the championship. And it is very interesting that in 2021, the number of national teams with foreign player dominance, more than 50%, already reached 19 teams. I think it is a lot. And there were only 5 national teams where players from the domestic league were in majority. The next slide shows player migration too. As I said, it was very important regime change that allowed the Eastern Bloc and Southeastern Europe to become part of the global and European player migration. It is very interesting. Yugoslavia was an exception because the country's football's players had already played in Western European leagues in previous decades. Here is important the neutrality of the country. After the change of regime, after 1996, Western Europe was the most attractive destination for players from Southeastern European football players. The most popular country was Germany, followed by Italy, Spain, and England. And here we can see a difference compared to European player migration. After 2000, England became the most attractive country for European players. England here is the most important. And we can see internal migration within the football region. The main destination, Turkey, and the smaller destination include Greece and Croatia. On the next slide, you can more statistics about the national teams of Southeastern Europe and Yugoslavia. Statistical data show that the number of foreign players increased continuously after a change of regime, as I said, both in the Balkan region and in the post-Yugoslav states. It can be concluded that their number exceeds the European average. In the 2021, the proportion of the foreign players from Balkans countries reached 73%. And in the case of post-Yugoslavia, here is 81%. Southeastern Europe is keeping up with the current trends. I can say that matches the trends of other football regions. We see similar processes in Central Europe and Northern Europe as well. And you can see on the slide the statistic of the top 4 countries too. This category, these countries play a prominent role in the player migration. With the help of this slide, I would like to emphasize 2 important things. Firstly, only during the 2016 tournaments was Latin Europe the most important attractive destination for Balkan footballers. In contrast, in other tournaments, the most attractive region, Western Europe. Secondly, I would like to draw your attention the role of Eastern Europe. In the 2000s, after the 2000s, more and more football players moved to Eastern Europe leagues, mainly to Russia and Ukraine. Russia is a major host country in this region. This is an interesting aspect in the shadow of the Russian-Ukrainian war. I think the Eastern European trend started to follow a different path than Europe. And this slide, this table shows the distribution of Southeastern European foreign players in different football regions. The fewest legionnaires in the top 4 championship countries, and the high proportion of legionnaires are in Eastern Europe, in Balkan, in Central Europe, and in Northern Europe. These shows that these regions are on the peripheral position in terms of European football. And at the end of this presentation, I will formulate the conclusions, some conclusions. The effectiveness of the region lags behind Western and Latin Europe. This region has donor character in player flow. Players migrate to other countries, as I said. But after the change of regime, football in Southeastern Europe strengthened in some aspects. For example, Turkey became a subcenter in the European football map. Many players signed contracts with Turkish league terms. And this situation of Turkey is the same as the Russia in Eastern Europe. Greece won gold medal, as I said, and I For example, Croatia is successful at the football European Championships since 1996. It has participated in the tournament, in the 6 tournaments. Here is a mistake, excuse me. And more countries can make it to the European Championships than before. But the reason is the increase in the number of participants, as I am said under this presentation. And thank you for your attention with a famous picture or photo from Belgrade, from the final of European Championship. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Engelbert, for this very insightful presentation. I'm not a big football fan and do not have any big knowledge, but it was enlightening for me to learn also that we are still on peripheral role. I thought also that we are big in football, but at least maybe you're good in tennis. So I would like to ask other participants if you have any questions on this very interesting presentation. If no, then we will go to the next presenter.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Our next presenter is Ms. Frauke Sebas. Sorry, I don't know if I pronounced your surname well. Sebas.
Yeah, yes, that's okay. Don't worry about it.
So I learned that you also did your master in Netherlands in peace and conflict studies, and I'm not sure afterwards, and that you're an expert in Kosovo, and that you spent some time in Pristina working for the EU Commission. So we are looking forward to see your insights from the spot.
Thank you very much. Yeah, actually, like Istvan, I'm based in Budapest right now. I'm doing my PhD at Andrássy University, which is actually a German-speaking university based in Budapest. This should work, right?
Lucky, nice place to do your studies. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's a very beautiful city. Thank you very much. By the way, if you want to stretch a little bit throughout my presentation, I know it's after lunch, feel free to move it a little bit. I prefer you awake because I'm actually not going to talk about the Balkans in the East, but the Balkans in the West. But I think it can be an interesting contrast. I hope this is working. Yes. So what I'm going to talk about is what I call the ordering in the so-called Belgrade-Pristina dialogue. I guess most of you are familiar with what it is. Just very briefly, it's a facilitated political dialogue between Serbia and Kosovo, which was started in 2011 with the consent of all parties. In 2013, there was a preliminary agreement. After 2018, it was kind of discontinued, or it was kind of disrupted, and it has gotten new speed and incentives since the war on Ukraine. But yeah, I will not go into the depth. But what I'm really interested in, or what I saw when looking closer at the dialogue and at people who are actually addressing the dialogue and analyzing it, is that the dialogue has actually become an instrument for geopolitical power plays. This is probably nothing new for people who are looking at the Balkans. And this has severe effects on the EU enlargement policy and on the dialogue itself. So what do I mean by ethno-territorial ordering? Is that the international mediators, so this is the EU chiefly, but also the US to a certain extent, strengthen and or employ ethno-territorial rationales in the negotiations towards so-called normalization of relations between Serbia and Kosovo, even though this actually contradicts their own values and declared foreign policy goals that they have set themselves for the region. I will skip the background due to the lack of time. What I have done methodologically is I have looked at different, these are the main sources that I've used, but of course also sources, but this is a list of analyses that have served me kind of an entry point and have led me to, where I've discovered kind of recurring patterns of this ethno-territorial ordering that happens throughout the dialogue. And these four patterns are actually actors, who is included, who is excluded, but also who this dialogue is actually made for, who actually has an agency. Then the language, so the concepts, the rhetoric, but also the framing of the dialogue, segregation versus inclusion. This kind of spans the entire patterns, but as you will see, I have one special focus on that. And then as well, the diverging narratives for future prospects. I will keep it a bit short because we have limited time, but I will tell you my preliminary conclusions that I have found from my research so far. So from since I wrote see that my autocorrect changed Fra to Frau, just ignore that. This is GERs for German, and Frau is supposed to be FRA for France. I think my autocorrect wanted to be German. Okay, anyway, but on the mediation side, if you the first look, even on any kind of website, whenever you Google the dialogue, is that there is one special representative from the European Union, who is Miroslav Lajčák, the special envoy, who corresponds very closely with the EU High Representative for Foreign and Security Policy, Josep Borrell. So the EAS, the External Action Service, is heading the talks and informs the other players. This is the theory. But in fact, the member states are interfering on various levels, the Peace and Security Council, the embassies in the two countries, especially maybe in Kosovo. And they have different diverging, so they have different solution approaches and as well as red lines. At the same time, we see that the European Parliament has a diverging way. For example, they have recently adopted a resolution that demands Belgrade to accept or demands Serbia to recognize Kosovo's independence, which is very far from what the...
I'm sorry for the interruption. Can you hear me? I would like to ask Mr. Istvan to cancel his screen share because we see his presentation now. I wrote him on a chat. I don't know if he's still available and with us.
We do see presentation.
Yeah, you do, but
I will try to share my screen then. I'm very sorry.
Thank you for your attention. And there is a penalty kick. Oh.
Can you see
okay, now we see Belgrade-Pristina dialogue actors.
Actors?
Yeah, thank you, Istvan.
Great, now we just have to see it here.
We see Belgrade-Pristina dialogue. Actors
okay, yes, go back. Okay, great. Yes, perfect, thank you.
Yeah, okay. Please continue, and sorry for interruption.
No, thank you for making us aware. I didn't know. Okay, great. Yes, so on the one hand, we have the European Parliament who's going a different path, and then we also have the Commission who should be more involved probably because we know that the dialogue is very much connected also to the accession process of both countries, and even in the language, there's more and more, it's more and more connected by all players, and yet the Directorate General for Neighborhood and Enlargement Policy is actually not very much involved. And we know from some interviews that they actually feel that they are not informed enough, and that most of the talks are actually closed-door talks, and the Commission is not even informed about many things. We also have the US, of course. The special envoy post was actually brought in by US President Trump. Richard Grenell, who's actually still very vocal. If you, I don't know if you read Serbian news, for example, but Richard Grenell is still very involved in this, even though he doesn't have an official post in this anymore. And the current envoy is Gabriel Escobar under the current administration in the US. And then very recently, so this is not even in my paper yet because it was very recently announced, Germany and France also have appointed representatives, and then the NATO Quint format. So that this is Germany, France, Italy, UK, and US. They often interfere, like they utter statements, or they have closed doors talks as well. So we can see there's a huge confusion. Then on the government side, like of those being mediated, we have of course the governments. We've already heard a little bit about the whole stabilocracy, democratic legitimacy point. But what is more important to me, I think, is who is excluded. So especially the people who are mostly affected. So that's mostly, I would say, first of all, the people living in the Serb majority regions in the north, including also non-Serb, non-Albanian minorities, or non-majorities as they are called in Kosovo, who are not really taken into account. And then in official documents, they're not even named, even though they should really be the ones mostly addressed. generally there's a lack of transparency who is conferred, who is included in the dialogue. And then what we see is that also the Albanian government is trying to get more involved, and we have more of a framing of kind of ethnic Albanians versus ethnic Serbs. And we saw the accumulation of this in the so-called land swap agreement in 2018, which, where there was the suggestion to kind of cut off part of Serbia, put it to Kosovo, cut off part of Kosovo to put it to Serbia, and that would be the solution. And as you probably remember, the political reactions and kind of how do you say, Cinderella sleep of the dialogue. As I mentioned, there's a lack of transparency and structural communication, including inside the EU structures and member states. There is an aim since kind of the restart or retaking charge of the EU in 2020 to make it more inclusive. However, there's still a lack of transparency also towards the common public. And that bears the question as well, that who represents the interest of the people living in the disputed region. Of course, the majority Serb north of Kosovo is the central topic, including in the negotiation. And this kind of bears the question who this dialogue is for, and who actually has agency in the dialogue. This becomes maybe even more clear or more apparent when we talk about the concept and the rhetoric of the dialogue framing that is being used. So to quote the External Action Service, the dialogue aims to promote cooperation between the two sides, help them achieve progress on the path to Europe, and very crucially, improve the lives of the people. And again, I would think this is mostly directed at the people living in the territories. And then the other thing, because there's a very strong connection to the accession process, I have quoted from the Treaty of the European Union, the paragraph on values, so Article 2. So the values which are common to member states are a society in which pluralism, non-discrimination, tolerance, justice, solidarity, and equality between women and men prevail. So this is something that they want to foster. That's the EU acquis, Copenhagen criteria, so many names, so many self-set goals. But we can see that this is something that is very much abandoned in the dialogue when it comes to the strategy, because the strategy is to have a sequenced dialogue. So first go with the easy topics, then go towards the more difficult topics, political topics especially, and kind of hope for a spillover effect that it will work out in the end. And what is used is the so-called constructive ambiguity, which means that the terms are supposed to be defined by the parties, not by the EU as a mediator, which is aimed at, I think somebody said it already today, that's like, we don't want to interfere, you have to do it, you have to want it. This is local ownership. But as we see, like, how do you have local ownership if the agency is actually not on your side? But at the same time, what we see, the result is that there's a lot of political instrumentalization of this ambiguity in the documents. So as I said, the EU is claiming a neutral standpoint, but at the same time holds the exclusive framing power in the dialogue, and thereby also admits their own geostrategic interests, because they are obviously not a neutral partner. They have their own political interests, and these actually become quite clear, especially now that they define it as a geostrategic interest. And what we also see is a very strong positivization of the outcomes, saying, for example, the 2013 agreement was hailed as a huge success. And there's an emphasis on, this is the common goal of all parties, and we will get there, and everything is great, basically. But the result is that they're actually failing to address ethno-territorial reasoning on the sides of the parties, which they kind of, like when they return to their countries and give their speeches, this is very much present. This is not addressed in the dialogue, at least not publicly, and thereby they endorse, or the EU endorses, this ethno-territorial reasoning and instrumentalization of the dialogue, which of course doesn't make it better. So the conclusions when it comes to concepts, rhetoric, and framing here. So by framing the dialogue as being in the interest of the parties and negotiations being led by them, the mediating parties, chiefly the EU, omit their own interests and goals, applying strategic vagueness while retaining the exclusive framing power and primary agency. Constructive ambiguity, as I mentioned, aims at leaving aside ethno-territorial questions, but actually results in the prevalence of these rationales in the diverging interpretations of the parties. And then because they are using this to instrumentalize the dialogue in their own countries and towards their own populations, they actually lose bargaining power in the international negotiations because they have created capital in their own national arenas, and they will find it very hard to kind of withdraw from that, as we can see now with the current dialogue. And at the same time, in the keenness to portray the dialogue as a foreign policy success, the mediating parties do not address central obstacles in the process, which allows them to deepen, for example, the interference of Serbian forces in the north of Kosovo, which actually in the agreement they said they will withdraw from. The third topic that I found, or the third recurring pattern, is the question of segregation versus inclusion. Obviously, the latter is supposedly the goal of the dialogue, but actually what we see is an increasing ethnic enclavization, which deepens existing divides between and compromises state-building goals in the US and in Kosovo, because we must not forget that the EU is present in different ways in Kosovo, including has one of the strongest forces in the state-building part, but they have never explicitly mentioned Kosovo's recognition by Serb as a goal to the dialogue, even though probably that was the expectation from the start, that this would finally be the result. But at the same time, without EU pressure, Serbia has really no incentive to settle the dispute on this level, or to actually find a durable solution under the current administration, but actually benefits from this limited statehood, especially since this normalization of the parallel structures that they actually agreed to withdraw secures its influence in the country and is not sanctioned, and also secures the stronger power, let's say, in the dialogue. And this actually fosters ethno-territorial division, prevents integration into the Kosovo administration structures. Due to the non-recognition of 5 EU member states of Kosovo, we definitely see no playing field, because of course they also exert their own influence. And we have this weird ambiguity. You probably saw it like in EU documents. Every time you mention Kosovo, there's like a little asterisk, yeah. And it says we don't say that Kosovo is a country, UN resolution 1244. I don't know the exact, I can't remember the exact text, but you know what I mean. And this focus on the ethno-territorial animosities. Okay, no, I will not go into this. This is a bit too far. But just to conclude, the emphasis of this territorial outcome is the emphasis is very much on the territorial outcome. At the same time, the consequences of the parallel structures are not really taken into account. This actually increases this kind of enclavization of Kosovo statehood, has a huge impact on the inhabitants and their broad security interests, including health security, including educational security. I mentioned this during lunch. Like if I'm a Serbian woman living in the north of Kosovo and my husband beats me, I will not call Kosovo authorities. Who do I call? Probably nobody. And if nobody helps me, then he'll probably just continue. So just as one very specific sad anecdote of what it means to live in this kind of environment, which is given very, very little attention. But at the same time, what it does, of course, which is very, very detrimental to the entire process, is that it supports ethno-nationalist agendas throughout the region, not only in Kosovo and Serbia, and actually is very strongly disconnected from the EU's policy goals in Kosovo and the Western Balkans. And this is one quote from one of the analysis I've used. It would be a perverse outcome if the international intervention to stop ethnic cleansing in Kosovo were concluded by legitimating nationalist goals of ethnic segregation. And I think this is kind of a very drastic expression showing that this is going in a very wrong direction. And this part I will just keep very short. What are the narratives on future prospects? Serbia, the government of Serbia has said again and again, Kosovo will never be independent. We will never give up Kosovo. The Kosovo administration says the only solution for us is recognition by Serbia. And again, Kosovo Serbs and other non-majority communities are not really not even on the table, but they're certainly not, even though they might be a possible bridge between the governments, given their own experiences. I will also this. Yeah, just my conclusion so far is that, in fact, my hypothesis, I would say, is confirmed by this, by the findings that I have so far. So the mediators undermine their own geostrategic goals and fail to overcome this framework in favor of more inclusive concepts, which results in kind of a vicious circle of non-recognition for Kosovo, as I called it. The recognition of Kosovo is, of course, I actually left out the mediators' narratives on the future. Sorry, I will just put this in here real quick. So the EU is still saying it's not about the recognition of Kosovo. We will find a solution regardless of, like, we will accept every kind of solution, which is of course not true, as we have seen that the land swap deal was stopped by EU forces. And at the same time, the US is very much in favor of Kosovo's independence, but kind of, yeah, says it only half-heartedly, let's say, so that the EU can actually contain or remain in their remain in the leading role and remain in their narrative. So the recognition of Kosovo's independence is the central issue in my understanding, and a clear strategy by the EU would actually help to weaken the power games, including illiberal alliances between different forces within and outside the EU. At the same time, we see that the role of the US is quite ambiguous. It was very different under Trump, and it might be a bit different after the Biden administration. And we see that Kosovo, or the Kosovo issue, has become a proxy for competing great power interests once again, or has never ceased to be that. At the same time, we see that societal reconciliation is sidelined. So missing persons is a huge topic, of course, for the inhabitants of all regions there, as well as compensation for refugees or returns, which also leads to a loss of credibility, or generally the lack of strategy leads to this loss of lack of credibility, and a loss of leverage, which also threatens this overarching goal of stability that the EU, of course, has for the region. There were voices that said we should abandon the dialogue altogether and focus on internal reforms, and then maybe get back to it later. But there are also other voices that says we should really improve the communication and be transparent as well about the interests of the different players, including the mediators, especially, which should just be forward, and including the EU member states. So two possible solution approaches would be to include local experiences much more, especially of those people who are directly affected, and discuss different possible government formats for the Serb majority regions. The official acronym is ACSM. For example, we have the very, very different parts of regional autonomy inside of Europe. So why can't we discuss different formats? And again, to have local representatives at the table to assure acceptance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frauke, for this very insightful presentation. Even though we come from this region, but so many details and very good analysis. So I'm sure you would have some comments or questions.
No, it's Prizren. I've actually taken that picture with. It's the most multicultural city, or so they say. Used to. But yeah, it's still quite.
Used to be. Just one foundation. Try to use it. That's something the same way as Bosnia. It's only so. Living in Bosnia, living in Kosovo. I don't think it's France, Germany, Austria. The Austrian, Germans is Austrian.
Yeah, but the
Austrians are Austrians, as far as I know. They're not German Austrians.
Yeah.
But there are people who moved during this 30s and 40s period, and also Germans doing this. So that area, Czech Republic, you're regarded as Germans.
We actually call them Sudet Germans in Germany.
Well, and also about ethnic Germans in Romania.
Yeah, but of course it's the differentiation of ethnic versus kind of national terms.
Oh, that's
so,
common mistake. Not nationality, only ethnicity. In terms of Bosnia and Herzegovina, ethnicities. There's no Bosnian nation. That's the main deal. There's no nation in Bosnia. Otherwise, there's no problem.
But when you write your nationality, once you enter the UK, for example, what do you say? What do you write on your card, landing card?
Yeah, but
your nationality.
Bosnians, let's say Bosnians. There's no nationality in terms of ethnic designation. Ethnicity is what we deal with Bosnians, Serbs, Kurds, Bosniaks, Arabs.
But for example, you say, or like in the international, you say Kosovo Albanians versus Albanians in Albania, because it's a different experience, because like if you grow up as an ethnic Serb in Kosovo, that's like, it's not maybe not the same as in Serbia. So that's what I mean when I say Kosovo Serbs. Yeah.
The thing is, we not feel. Of course, there are some nuances in culture. Of course, it's obvious, Europe. They have some different traditions. They do refer themselves with most of them as being Serbs, not Eastern Serbia residents of Serbs. Serbs living in any region of the former Yugoslavia. So that's one of the major issues with the Serbs and that dialogue which is referred as
I know, yeah. Obviously, yeah. No worries. Just yeah, I guess it's a question of definition of like working definition as well. So like if I'm referring to Kosovo Serbs, I mean a specific group with a specific interest. I mean their interest is a different one than the Serbs in Serbia, obviously, because they're directly affected in a much different way than if you live in Belgrade, for example.
Well, that's what some like some people.
Me, for example.
The problem is, I personally don't think that you're proud of doing the politics and Bosnian experience. We will have some shared rules and we strive for this unify some artificial illusions, which I enforce by referring to people who serves means that sort of illusion. That's what we need. That's why I think that so no one also would like to be referred to as apostles. Because the main sentiment is possible in terms of some independent state, which is not recognized either by those first and also by certain authorities.
Sorry.
Any more comments?
May I?
Yes, please.
Just a comment and it's the question if you agree or not, as a specialist.
I'm still doing my PhD.
Okay. This last crisis in Kosovo, you observe, and in Poland was a lot of news that this will be a war and so on. Okay. And I started reading Serbian news and I saw how many lot of meetings as Vučić. And this is interesting that they have a lot of mediators, okay, mediators, but they want just to be present in these dialogues, but don't want to find one solution. And maybe this is a problem that they don't have one mediator. They have like Lajčák, okay, and others who want to be present, but they don't want to find a solution.
I think they don't agree on a solution. They're not transparent about their own interests and strategies. They don't have really a common strategy, I would also argue. And then yeah, I think there are different goals on the table. There are different actors on the table. And I mean, what's really interesting about the official mediators, so Lajčák and Borrell, they are both former foreign ministers of countries who don't recognize Kosovo, which also means that it was their job for some years to defend their position on non-recognizing Kosovo, which I think in the EU's view guarantees impartiality, saying that, okay, we have those mediators, but they are speaking for the EU, but they don't recognize Kosovo, like their countries don't recognize Kosovo, so this is kind of a match. But I guess the perception in the region is different. There is definitely, a bias is definitely seen, I think, on this. It's my perception, obviously. But I obviously know the Kosovo case better. I know Kosovo better, like definitely. But what you said, especially the last conflict, let's say at the border before the, I think it was also really a war of information. I also did some research on different papers, including Serbian ones with Google Translate. There was, on the political side, also on the government side, I think there was a lot of reiteration of that the current government in Kosovo wants to destabilize the region and wants to kind of kick out the Serbs from there. And yeah, this was, of course, spurring fear probably, and including in other countries. And now at the end of this month, or like the first of the next month, this license plate agreement will come into force, and we'll see.
I can see that Professor Engelbert's camera is on. Also, Professor, would you like to ask a question, or?
Is it not here?
Oh, he turned it off.
No question, excuse me, I heard, but no question for me.
Okay. Thank you. Albert, would you like to say something?
I don't know how to put this back there.
I'm not sure, it doesn't matter. We are going to wrap it up soon. I just want to say then that our colleagues from Albania canceled their participation. Hope they're going to send their papers, or they had quite also interesting topic. And anyone else would like to say something for the whole day, or just? Oh, sorry, I didn't see. I'm so sorry. Okay, I thought it was not on purpose. I'm so sorry. So yes, Professor Crnogorac is a professor here at the Faculty of Political Science. He's a language professor, teaches English, and he will talk today about the cultural grammar and cultural conflicts in works of Momo Kappa. Adjective Balkans in the meaning Oriental. So we are on the same page and continuing with the terminology. Thank you.
Okay. Well, just I'd like to highlight some points about.
Do you have presentation or?
No, just to remind me. Okay. Well, for those who are not familiar with the work of Momo Kappa, just a couple of words. It's one of those writers from the period of socialist or communist, better say, communist Yugoslavia, whose work was largely unrecognized during his life, and he was more recognized for his drawings and his success as an artist, painter, but also he published, I think, 50 volumes of short stories, 20 or so novels. He was very productive in terms of writing screenplays for TV and movies. He was a very successful journalist, one of the first hosts. So very versatile character. And what's important about his work is that he was largely autoreferential writer. he was very intertextual, and he used, what's important for our discussion today, he used certain terms consistently, with a lot of irony infused in them. Some of his works basically were written in the sense of, large sense of Kipmanism. Some of his works were censored. What he wrote about was not quite popular in the 60s and 70s, Yugoslavia. So he had to pay attention to these things, and he did it in a masterful way. He is now compared to some of the greatest masters of short stories, such as Chekhov. He's in many pieces of criticism referred to as Yugoslav Chekhov for various reasons. One of the reasons was that the short stories are indeed novels in minute. He created characters, he created dialogues, he created situations that appealed to vast audience, readership, and he was translated in, I think, 30 languages now. But what makes it different for someone coming from abroad, especially coming from Anglo-Saxon culture, to understand his works, is his deployment of certain terms that have multiple meanings. And today I will focus on his term Balkan in opposition to European, which basically corresponds to this original West-East axis of Orientalism discourse, because whenever he uses these adjectives, for anyone translating his works, it would be, in the least to say, a wrong thing to do to translate them literally. So European, the way he uses European in his works should never be translated as European, for example, in English texts. And the way he uses Balkan also deserves another approach and deserves a reader-focused approach in translation. And that's why probably he was largely bypassed in terms of English translations. So he was translated in German, in Swedish, in French, in many European languages, but not in English, or at least not to the extent that these translations that I referred to were done. So what he does is create an atmosphere. So it's not only the use of words, of these terms, it's the whole family of words. It's the immediate context, both verbal and contextual, that he asks his reader, asks from his reader. Why? Because his texts were intended for those who were well-informed readers, for those who had important or significant background in history, in politics, in economics. So that's why he could reach those elites that opposed, for example, regime of the former Yugoslavia. Now, with reference to circumstances of the present day, we can see that he's even more vivid today than he was 50 or 40 years ago. Why? Because the same discourse is used both in, I'll refer to the region of former Yugoslavia as that corresponding the Balkans, and the discourse used in predominantly Western countries, Western European countries, to refer to this particular region in turn. For example, for years, the public broadcasting system of Serbia used to advertise itself as being javni medijski servis Evropske Srbije, so public broadcasting system or service of European Serbia. So they focused and they would like to emphasize this idea of European Serbia, which, in my opinion, is completely wrong thing to do. It shows an enormous element of auto-chauvinism, because without European would make it perfectly clear what they do. So no need to establish this European Serbia. Naturally, this European Serbia would mean that they strive for the highest standards in their profession, which again is redundant. You do it without referring to it as European. So you simply do your job as it is supposed to be done. Now, the same goes with Balkan. So what Kapor deploys in his texts is a very interesting method. At the beginning, he introduces us with some characters, with some plot, with some ordinary situation that could happen to just about anyone living in the former Yugoslavia. Then he, in the manner of harsh critic, shows that this person or group of characters act in an appropriate way. He attributes the adjective Balkan to them, and also he adds other words, a set of words with completely negative meaning. So he never mentions Balkan with any positive sentiment. So it's always negative sentiment. Whereas European is always associated with some ideas of enlightenment, some ideas of progress, some ideas of ideals to strive for in terms of or from the position of someone living outside that area. But as you move towards the end of this this short story, what happens is following. He somehow manages to show that basically these ideals, as embodied by the use of the term European, are not that monolithic and not that progressive as they seem to be. Basically, they are deconstructed to the point that they show that it's a completely different set of ideas to begin with. He was an advocate of people living in this region. He opposed the practice of political and economic migration to Western Europe. Whenever he found himself in that sort of context, he always criticized it for being dehumanized. So he was, in a way, some sort of tribune, which was difficult to understand even for the readership in Serbian language, and let alone in translations. So that's one of the reasons his translations, the attempts, his translations were rather unsuccessful. So just to provide you with one of these examples. I'll just translate it and refer to the most important points. In one of his short stories, he says, in the beginning of this century, frequent visitors of this cafe on the left bank of the River Seine would encounter a handsome young man dressed in some bizarre folklore clothes somewhere from the Balkans. So if you take a look at even the programs funded by European Commission today, at least Creative Europe, or I don't know which exactly, but they are always championing these individual traditions. They organize and they sponsor festivals where these traditions are shown and shared with other peoples. So it comes as a bit of a surprise that someone would deem anything coming from the Balkans, which is deeply innate in its sense, as bizarre. So the very use of the adjective bizarre is here problematic. As is, and now I'll make this connection with the Oriental, as is problematic the use of exotic in terms of Eastern countries, Asian countries, which was the dominant element in English discourse in the 19th and throughout the 20th century. So bizarre and exotic stand at the very same level, meaning something that's unusual, not acceptable, something not to be meddled with, something basically just to keep aside from yourself. Then he says that one of the students in his class used to be knocked on his plain Balkan skull. Well, skull is a skull, so no need to refer to it as Balkan skull. But Balkan skull would here mean stubborn, the person who opposes rules, person who is not consistent with civilian way of life. Again, in the same sense as Orientals, in terms of Said's dichotomies were depicted as savage, as brutal, as not rational. So opposed to rational white, to obedient white, etc., etc. So I'll elaborate on these points in my text. This is just to show how even today, in our texts throughout the former Yugoslavia, I think that not a day goes by that you can find examples of these adjectives being used in the very sense. There's a funny parallel to this. For example, if you want to advertise some items of clothes, such as shirts or ties, okay? A normal procedure here would be to maintain its Italian design. So no trader emphasizes Romanian design, Bulgarian design, so it's always Italian design. The very same fashion as, for example, German quality. So German quality is top quality, and there's nothing that comes from Germany that's not quality. But of course, we know that it's not true. It can be true. Okay, we can discuss it later. But here, when you hear German quality, you ask no questions. It means that it has no match. It's engineered in superb way, and no reason to question its quality. The very same product might come from another country. For example, there's this opposition with China. And when you say Chinese quality, well, it raises many issues here. So I'll try to explicate some of these ideas. I think that we should be careful when using some of established expressions, terms that we think that they maintain one idea, but in fact, they could maintain a completely different idea, especially when they come with, with some specific set of words surrounding them, or when they aimed at strengthening their meaning. So I would like to conclude with this and hope to interest you into reading, get you interested into reading this paper. Turns out. Thank you.
Maybe just from a methodological standpoint, I assume
well, yeah, because I used to, I have an MA degree in literature and mainly post-colonial paradigm, so that's...
Well, perhaps it would be useful to take a look at some literature from cultural studies, anthropology, discourse analysis, because some of the things you compare would maybe require a bit more nuance, because you seem to compare things that different actors say, and then also the question of perception. So perhaps to take a look at...
Yeah, when I say post-colonial paradigm, I include these because it's really inseparable and you cannot deal with any of these issues without... Okay, so okay, yeah, thank you, thank you.
I do apologize for leaving, but I had an urgent call. So sorry. Do you have any questions or would like to add some comments on the professor's presentation?
We did already.
You did already, okay.
Done.
Okay, then we will sum it up for today. So we had some very interesting presenters from different parts of the world. We covered East Asia. We heard something from Japan, from China. We got introduced by our new director and his insight, how he sees this concept and cooperation. I would like to ask also Dalibor if you would like to say something for the end of the conference. I'm quite pleased how this second day turned out to be, and I'm looking forward to some And what about for later on for the publishing of the papers? You will inform them. Yes.
Already sent articles, and some of the participants will do that in the future, in the next 2 weeks.
Okay, as I said at the beginning, this is quite important for us, not only for covering the Balkans theme, but also for, this is the first time we discuss anything about East Asia, and we are talking about, I hope next year we'll have even more, including Korea. But this is the first time that we discuss China at this faculty. So for the information for further on, now you have time to rest, and then at 6 o'clock we will meet. Dalibor will send you instructions near the city center at the Museum of Contemporary Art. We're going to see the collection of modernism from, actually this is the exhibition that came from us, from Matica Srpska, from Serbia. And after that, we don't have that many restaurants, but the one that we have, that we put here, we're quite proud of because it's situated in the old castle, which is originated from Roman time and then Turkish Empire as well. So it's got these features mainly from that period. So looking forward to meet you later on. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Professor Engelbert, thank you for staying with us until the end. And I hope to see you in Budapest or somewhere in Hungary also. And next time that you can come to our country as well. Thank you.
Thank you.